Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Mike Petrilli. I'm the Executive Vice President here at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. If you are new to us, we are one of the nation's leading education policy think tanks. We also do work on the ground in the great state of Ohio. We are a leading education reform advocacy organization, and we also are an authorizer of 10 charter schools. In fact, a lot of our staff is out in San Diego right now for the National Association of Charter School Authorizers Conference, saying hello to them via Twitter, and we're really glad to have you here today. We have got a fantastic event lined up for you. The next 3 hours are going to be jam-packed with information and a lot of discussion where we hope to unpack some of the controversies, curricular controversies, surrounding the Common Core. Those of you that don't know us may not know, but if you don't, where have you been? That the Thomas B. Fordham Institute is a strong supporter of these standards. And we are a strong supporter of the Common Core because we believe that the standards themselves came out quite well. If you don't know Fordham, you may not know that we have been studying state academic standards now for more than 15 years. In fact, back in 1997, right after we had launched, we released our very first ever report, but was trying to find it this morning. I couldn't find it. It was such a boring looking report with a plain cover. And it was called State English Standards by Sandra Stotsky. It was a report that our program committee chair at the time had suggested we do. That chair's name was Diane Ravitch. Some of these people will be familiar to you. And Diane, of course, had survived the standards wars of the early 90s and the aborted attempt to create national standards back then, which Diane was very much involved with. Those had crashed and burned, and then it was decided that the standards movement was going to move forward, but at a state-by-state level. And the 1994 reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, if anybody remembers back when Congress actually passed bills and passed laws and reauthorizations, that law required every state in the country to develop standards in English and in math. So by 1997, Diane said, well, let's find out how the states are doing. Are they developing standards that are worth teaching to? And so we came across Sandra Stotsky and we asked her to do this report. And the answer back then, as the answer was for many, many years, was the states were not doing well in developing good standards. We found that in English, and then later we did this in math and eventually science and history, but the story was much the same. That what we found was that the states were by and large developing standards that were very vague and nebulous. The kinds of standards you might expect if they were written by a committee. I mean, we know what happens when we get committees together. They were nebulous, and if they were specific, they often pushed schools in what we viewed as very much the wrong direction. This was back when there were still, very active reading wars, and a lot of the state standards were very whole languagey, very weak on what now we consider scientifically based reading. They were very weak on content. The math standards, many of them were promoting the fuzzy math, new math kinds of stuff. They were promoting things like handing very young children calculators because, we don't need kids to really be able to do that arithmetic anymore. And so year after year, we would look at these standards at Fordham and we would weigh in on them. And year after year, we would find that most state standards were terrible. And we would say so because that's what we do. Now, there were some exceptions, even from the beginning. I think California right away had very good standards, including those that Diane herself helped to develop. Indiana came out with some very good standards. Eventually, Sandra went to work in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts developed great standards across the board. And over time, a handful of other states followed our advice and looked to these other leading exemplars and built good, strong state standards too. But the overwhelming majority of states did not. Just year after year, the standards never got any better. And if you go back and you read some of those old reports that we did, you will sense a growing frustration that we would have. Partly it was just us saying, come on, please, is anybody out there reading these reports? And, why are we not having an impact? But more generally, it was the frustration that we had all this testing going on, right? This is now into the No Child Left Behind era. We've got all this testing going on, and it's all based on standards that were, by any fair measure, flawed. And it wasn't just us. The AFT used to look at these standards and they would find, basically the same thing. Other groups also. When you looked at them, it was just, there was no there there. And so what that meant was that the tests really were the standards. because you couldn't look to the standards and get much guidance on what was expected, or certainly about various approaches. So the tests became the standards, and with all the problems that came around with it. Well, over time, in our growing frustration, we started to write things saying, you know what, this state-by-state approach is not working. Maybe, what are some ways where we perhaps could get to better standards if we worked for common standards? And I think it was back in '96, we did a study, really a paper called To Dream the Impossible Dream, in which we talked about possible approaches to national standards. And one of those was for the states to come together, provide political cover to one another, and develop standards in concert. And fast forward many years and lots of efforts and energy, and as our opponents will tell you, millions of dollars of Gates funding later, and here we are, right? And we've got the Common Core. Okay, and by the way, Michelle is reminding me that for those of you tweeting out there, it is hashtag core controversy. Core controversy. For those of you here, it's okay, take your phone out if you're going to tweet. Okay, I can tell if you're tweeting or if you're checking your email. Okay, back to the schedule. So, all that said, for Fordham, the number one reason we support the Common Core is because of the strength of the standards. Now, that doesn't mean they were perfect. When they were going through the drafting process, we gave some of their lead authors, including Jason, who I'll introduce in a moment, a lot of grief. But they got better over time. And by the end, we thought that the math standards were worthy of an A- grade. The English standards, another one, the ones by David Coleman, only worthy of a B+. So Jason, you beat David on that one. All right. They might call him the architect, but clearly in Fordham's eyes, you came through with the higher grade. So not perfect, but pretty darn good. And in our estimation, significantly better than what 75% of the states had done before, and on par with the rest of them. Okay. So now here we are 3 years in. We all know there's a raging controversy about these standards. Much of the controversy, which really has become completely politicized, right? Just as so many other issues in our country, much of the debate's no longer about the standards, really, but it's about other things. The federal role, about data privacy, about all these other pieces, right? But the standards themselves are out there being implemented by teachers in real schools. There are 2 assessments being developed that are to be linked to these standards. And so here we are. Part of the debate, though, and certainly a big part of implementation, has been around the instructional shifts that the Common Core standards are calling for. And so what we're going to try to do over the next several hours is to, first of all, better understand what these instructional shifts are, hearing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and then also talk about some of the criticisms that have come along with them and some of the charges. So, for example, that math is promoting fuzzy math. Is that true? That it's going to leave our kids 2 years behind international competitors. That in English, that is going to push the classics out of the curriculum. Let's try to understand those arguments better. Now, again, our bias. We support these standards, okay? And so that's out there. But that does not mean that we, again, think they're perfect, nor does it mean that we think implementation's going swimmingly. Because as far as we can tell, and we don't have a lot of data yet, it's not. And we have a new study out today that's on English. We're going to talk about this more later in the program, okay? But our Common Core in the schools, a first look at reading assignments. This really was this survey of teachers that was really done almost a year ago. So you think of it as a baseline study to say, what were teachers doing before the implementation of the Common Core? And the answer is, frankly, there was a lot of pieces of this that they haven't started to do yet. We'll talk about this in the English section, but the Common Core says, for example, that we need to be assigning kids texts, books that are at their grade level. And yet most elementary school teachers overwhelmingly do not do that. They assign texts based on where the kid's current reading ability is. Just right text, so they won't be too frustrated. Okay, so that means there's a lot of work to be done yet to change teacher practice to be aligned with Common Core. But here's the other thing the study said. The teachers love the Common Core, and they say it's already been implemented in their schools, right? So it makes you wonder if some of those teachers out there do not understand the instructional shifts that are being called for. And if that's the case, then when these assessments come out next year, there's going to be a big rude awakening. We already expect the test to be harder, but these teachers might not understand just what's being asked of them. So we're going to try to talk about all of that in the next 3 hours. So we get to start today with math. And we have with us the lead author of the Common Core Math Standards, Jason Zimba, former professor of mathematics and physics at Bennington College, right? And now, what's the title? Partner? What do you guys go
Founding
for?
partner.
Founding partner at Student Achievement partners. Yes, there we go. Good. And he is going to help us understand these instructional shifts. And I would argue that when I've been going around the country testifying and speaking at various hearings, I'm going to Wausau, Wisconsin next week. Neil, if you'd like to come with me, that would be great.
I just stay.
All right, Neil does. Neil, on several occasions I have traveled to some state capital to testify, and Neil has phoned in his testimony on the other side by speakerphone. I never knew that was actually an option, or else I would have known. Okay. Yeah, all right, well, there it is. All right, so, he's going to help us understand. Oh, what I was saying was that the big controversy, I don't hear that much about literature anymore. What I hear more and more about is that this is promoting fuzzy math, and that this is, has a crazy way of teaching our kids to do math. So we want to understand that in this first hour. So, Jason, let's start off. Help us understand, what are the instructional shifts that the Common Core math standards are calling for?
Well, thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me. And you joked about David versus me, this and that. This was actually, in truth, a very large process. And what I wanted to say about it, by way of context, is that to an unprecedented degree, these standards were developed based on evidence. I had participated in, seen previous development of state standards, and to say that they weren't being based on evidence is an understatement. The Common Core standards, we looked at research on high-performing countries, research on college readiness, career readiness, domestic research on math education, major reports and recommendations, the wisdom of lifelong educators who were part of the working groups and part of the review process, and the best of previous state standards. And so if you ask what does it all add up to, 3 shifts: focus, coherence, and rigor. I'll start with focus. Focus comes first. It's the most important because it creates the conditions for the other 2. Crucially, grades K through 5 focus overwhelmingly on arithmetic. High-performing countries tend to study fewer topics in each grade, but they study them in greater depth. They teach them to greater mastery so that kids can build on a secure foundation year by year. Which brings me to the second shift, coherence. Coherence is roughly the idea that math should make sense, so that what students are learning this year should build logically on what they learned last year, should prepare logically for what they're going to learn next year. Previous state standards were often mathematically incoherent. What focus and coherence allow you to do is to pave the way for greater rigor. And by rigor, I mean we strive equally for conceptual understanding of the mathematics, skill and fluency in the procedures, and the ability to apply what we're learning. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody has their favorite one of those 3. The standards say, cut it out. In fact, kids need all 3 in order to progress in mathematics and be successful mathematically after high school. And again, that's why we have to focus, because we're really asking to raise our game in the things that matter most and insist on all 3 of those components of rigor.
So when you say coherence, I mean, what were states doing in the past in terms of not having things progress logically? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, so you can find examples where students were asked to deal with adding and subtracting angles, up to 180 degrees before they were expected to be able to add and subtract multi-digit numbers of 3 digits. Just crazy stuff that happens when, the people writing the standards, there's a table over there that does geometry, a table over here that does algebra, a table over here, and then, of course, they all write to their heart's extent, and then they carpet staple the whole thing together, and the kids are on the hook for it. So there's, coherence at a single grade. There's also coherence across grades, and they're important.
Now, when we reviewed the standards 3 years ago, it was the elementary school standards that I think we found to be the strongest, and we liked this focus on arithmetic and standard algorithms. We're very traditional in that way, right? And not just because the evidence indicates from the National Math Panel and others that kids need to have that stuff down cold if they're going to be able to do higher level math to automaticity. Yet, I hear all the time when I'm out there around the country that this is fuzzy math. And that, you see the YouTube clip of some curriculum person at a school district saying, well, 4 times 3 equals 11. As long as they explain their answer well, that's okay.
The fuzzy math charge is not accurate. There are no standards that require students to invent algorithms. The standards require fluency with the standard algorithm, for each of the 4 basic operations, for whole numbers and decimals, and even the previous California standards didn't do that. The standards require students to know their addition facts and multiplication facts from memory. We were extremely clear about these things, partially thanks to feedback and public feedback, right? We were extremely clear about these things, more so than previous state standards, to the point where I think people who are concerned about rigor in mathematics would do better to cite the standards rather than to assail them. You mentioned the Fordham review, the Common Core, you said A-, of course, you know, Rhodes Scholar here's A-, drives him nuts. But we got full marks for content and rigor. And the presidents of every major mathematical society in the United States strongly support the Common Core. And that includes learned societies of mathematicians.
Yeah. So where is this charge coming from?
The
I mean,
4
what are
times
they?
3, can I talk? Can I speak to the 4 times 3 equals 11 thing?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. First of all, again, the standards require students to know from memory that 4 times 3 equals 12. So again, sometimes citing the standards is the best answer.
Yeah.
But even if, you know, all you care about is the reasoning, there is no reasoning that leads to the conclusion 4 times 3 equals 11. 4 times 3 equals 11 is a failure of reasoning. So even if all you care about is the reasoning, if you actually care about the reasoning, you care that the answer be right.
Yeah.
It's possible people are having a hard time grasping that caring more about conceptual understanding doesn't mean caring less about getting it right.
And is that what, so that's what some people are, when they are thinking fuzzy math, it's the standards around conceptual learning, that's been code word in some circles for, as opposed to arithmetic, as opposed to standard algorithms, it's this conceptual stuff.
I think the problem with this characterization is the word opposed.
Yeah.
Right. And it's one reason why, you know, we try so hard to explain the shifts in the standards and take time over these 3 components of rigor and how, you know, they're not meant to be competitive, they're meant to be additive.
So some opponents might be putting out misinformation on purpose, right? But I think some of them honestly believe that, look, there's inventing algorithms in here, you know, is allowed or encouraged. And then you have this situation again with people who actually are trying to help teachers implement the Common Core are doing workshops and giving bad information. So, I mean, how do we, you know, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. I mean, to the extent that there is a difference between what's in the standards and what some textbooks are promoting or what other, you know, people are out there espousing, how do we fix that disconnect?
Yeah, you know, so first of all, my fellow co-authors, Phil Darrow and Bill McCallum and I, with partner organizations, have developed publishers' criteria that aim to help with this. And on my organization's website, achievethecore.org, we have free tools that we develop with teachers to help people understand the standards and implement them well. That includes rubrics for evaluating the quality and alignment of instructional materials and assessments. And we're making these tools, building them with districts and teachers, making them freely available because we think that good purchasing decisions out in the field are going to depend on people understanding things better than apparently they do now. And so we're working hard on that to that end. Now, implementation, you know, it's taking time. They didn't make up that video. You know, its implementation is a big task. So my leading indicator, the first thing I'm looking to see, remembering that focus comes first, is that if we don't begin to see an intense focus on arithmetic in K-5, we're not seeing these standards being implemented.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's some things, just as with our study, we were looking for English around the text selection issue. For math, that's what you'd look for. You'd want to see a new, renewed focus on really the basics in arithmetic.
It won't by itself be enough. I mean, if you compare it to high-performing countries, it's also what's happening in those classrooms and the way it's happening that matters. But it creates the conditions, and without it, the rest is a bit of a fantasy.
All right, so let's move on through the grades here. Now we get into, let's say, the higher level math in middle school and high school. This charge that says, you know, even if these standards do raise the bar, they're still going to leave our kids 2 years behind our competitors, and they're not going to prepare students who are going into selective colleges or going into STEM fields, that it just doesn't get them far enough.
Well, there's a cluster of issues here. I mean, on the 2 years behind thing, research shows that to be false. Peer-reviewed research by an expert on international mathematics performance about the grades and topics in the standards in grades K through 8 shows that they agree with high-performing countries very well, in fact, better than any previous states.
This is the Bill Schmidt research?
And that same study shows that states whose previous standards more closely matched the Common Core tended to have higher NAEP scores. So the 2 years behind, the research shows that to be false. Now, you mentioned higher math and those issues. You know, there's a cluster of issues related to 8th grade algebra STEM fields, calculus, higher achievement, the definition of college rating, all that stuff.
Because these standards, they go through Algebra 2, basically?
They detail easily 3 years of mathematics at the level of Algebra 2. And sometimes I think people are operating under a misconception that the standards were meant to specify all 4 years of high school mathematics. They don't. Schools, of course, have to offer Algebra 2, and if you want kids to move to and through Algebra 2 with better command of the material, then you want the Common Core. On top of that, states should have sturdy pathways to calculus for all students able to succeed in that pathway. They should have calculus standards. California had calculus standards before the Common Core. They have calculus standards today.
And are you worried, though, that you see some states or school districts using this as an excuse to kind of end their math curriculum at 8th grade, I mean, at Algebra 2?
Well, you know, you mentioned 8th grade. This gets into the question of local decisions versus decisions that are made in the standards. So policy decisions versus what's in the standards. So, you know, as far as this, I think Massachusetts is an instructive example. Highest performing state never required all of their students to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Didn't require it before the Common Core, don't require it today. What they do is provide their districts with guidance about accelerated pathways that end with calculus in the senior year.
Okay.
So state and local leaders will continue to make policies and policy decisions about which students take high school courses in middle school. Common Core doesn't change that.
So, but now, all right, so let's say then there's some accelerated kids out there who take Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. But what about the assessments? Are those assessments going to be not given until the 9th grade? How does that work?
Different states have done it differently. My understanding in Massachusetts several years ago, prior to the Common Core, kids enrolled in Algebra 1 in 8th grade took the state accountability test as well as an end-of-course test in Algebra 1.
Yeah.
That's you know, again, those are going to be local decisions.
All right, so this idea that there's research that shows that, you know, if kids are going to go to college, they got to take Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, right? I mean, you just don't, you know, you don't think that's good science, that's not clear? I mean, because you're saying, well, we're going to, on this one, give more flexibility at the local level. But there's some other areas where, you know, the standards aren't so flexible. They're saying, well, look, there's clear evidence that we need to focus, for example, so we're going to push on that.
You had the highest performing state not requiring this of all their students, either before or after. They have the freedom to do that if they wish. The standards don't settle every single issue that state and local leaders will have to. For example, Massachusetts, one aspect of their approach, you'll notice, is that they're leaving it to the local districts. Who takes those courses and who doesn't.
All right, now I want in this one to really for you to maybe be speaking to people at the local level, at the district level. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. I have a kindergartner in the public schools now. I'm 6 weeks into my career as a public school parent, and you hear a lot of the math is going well, actually. I'm happy. So far, so good. He's doing great.
I have a first grader new in the system, and I have concerns.
Well, maybe I don't know enough to be concerned. This is yes. I'm more concerned about the social studies because I know more about that. Maybe that's why. There's a lot of ferment, though, that in frustration right now in Montgomery County, high-performing district, that the district is using the Common Core as an excuse to push back on a lot of the math acceleration. You know, that in previous years there's been a big push and allowance for kids who are doing well in math to go 1 grade level, even 2 grade levels ahead. And you'd have, you know, in some schools, half the second graders doing 4th grade math. And now they've said, no, we're going to push back on a lot of that. And there's a big concern that now you've got, you know, high-achieving kids sitting bored in math class because it's material they've already mastered. So help us understand, if you would. I know it's not in the standards themselves, but if you're a school district trying to figure out how to meld the Common Core with, you know, smart policies for high-achieving kids who are on the path, they want to be on the path to get to calculus by the 12th grade and go to selective colleges. I mean, what do you say to them about this?
Well, I mean, if you look at the guidance, for example, that Massachusetts gives, they talk about different acceleration models. There are a number of acceleration models. You can have a model that involves skipping things. So, like you suggested, perhaps someone going from 2nd grade to 4th grade. So skipping is one logical option. Compacting is another, where you say we're going to take the content that is normally taught in these 2 years or 3 years and we're going to make it into 1 year or 2. That would be, I think, more the way Singapore does it, a compacting model. So the kids are learning the same content at a different pace.
Right.
There's also models of doubling up. So you're taking geometry and algebra 1 at the same time. And then what I would point out is that the compacting options can also happen at different times. So you could, for example, take an honors algebra 2/trig that then takes you straight to calculus. Or, there are, as I say, all these models, some of them have the decision point at 6th grade, some of them have the decision at 7th or 8th. And, a state like Massachusetts is leaving it up to the districts, which I think shows the flexibility that the standards allow them.
Understood on the flexibility. I guess I'm trying to ask you to go a little bit further here, though, and give some advice to people, which is to say, when I hear the argument that says, well, because these Common Core standards are so much higher and tougher, we don't need acceleration anymore because they're challenging even to the top math students. I mean, is that something? I mean, to me, that sounds kind of fishy.
Well, if that were true, then I think you're still going to want to, writing standards doesn't alter underlying facts of human variability. Suppose the standards were so hard that they're pitched at a level of the 6th grader who takes algebra 1.
Right.
Well, then you'd better be doing something for the median kid. Right? So I don't see this argument. I don't understand the logic of it.
Yeah. So
what I do think is that kids need what kids need. And if some kids need harder problems, they should be getting harder problems. You can, by the way, make harder problems typically out of grade level materials. Certainly in middle school, the mathematics supports problems of arbitrary difficulty. And so, kids need nourishment. They need intellectual nourishment. And so I can't see how any standards, for example, previous standards in which all these same questions existed, should be used as an excuse not to give intellectual nourishment.
Right. So which is to say that, the Common Core standards are tougher than most states had before. But, they still are not going to be tough enough for our top students.
Well, when you talk about, so for example, gifted education, what I've heard is not necessarily that schools are cutting back on 8th grade algebra 1. I've talked to dozens of superintendents over the last year. I have not talked to a single one who is not offering algebra 1 in 8th grade. Someone would need to prove to me that that's happening. So as I say, and those decisions, whether that's true or false, are not up to me, not up to the standards.
Yeah.
Local leaders are going to make those decisions, and that's how it's always been. But when you talk about gifted education, you hear sometimes about people rolling back on that, and again, one would like to see the evidence of it. But if you consider that the gifted are no more than 5% of the population, the idea that standards, any standards, including previous state standards, are not going to suffice as a statement of learning goals for such an extreme segment of the population. I mean, consider that, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in this policy area, but in federal law, the gifted are defined as students who need services not ordinarily provided by the school in order to flourish. And so standards, at least academically, are the very definition of services ordinarily provided by the schools. So the standards are not an argument to cut back on services for gifted students.
That's helpful. All right, let's go back a little bit. And by the way, I'm going to open this up to the audience soon, so start getting your questions ready. Let's go back to this question again about materials, textbooks. You've got the publisher's criteria out there. Can you speak now, speak to parents or to educators who might be listening? What are some things to look for? If your child brings home a new textbook that says it's Common Core aligned, or you hear from the school, well, we're doing things differently this year because of the Common Core. What are some things that you want to see, and what are some things that are some red flags that might say to you, yikes, they're misunderstanding the standards?
Well, I always go back to the shifts. I want to see focus on the major work of each grade. And by the way, on my organization's website, achievethecore.org, you can see by grade where teachers and students are going to need to spend the strong majority of their time in order to meet these standards. The intricate, difficult, and necessary things that lead to next year's intricate, difficult, and necessary things.
Yeah.
So if you go to achievethecore.org and look for the major work of the grade, that's there. So you want to see your child spending most of their time on those things. And the idea that rigor has these three components, that we strive equally for conceptual understanding of mathematics, skill and fluency with the procedures, and to some extent applications, although that grows over the grade bands. The robustness and richness of applications ought to be higher in high school, obviously, and the standards are explicit on that point. So you want to see those things. Often, unfortunately, what you see is the kids spending a lot of their time learning to tell time, learning to count money, all culturally necessary things for our schools to teach. But
Son does love counting money. I will just put that out there.
yeah, and if the emphasis is on the counting, great. We need to remember, the basic job of kindergarten is counting and cardinality and early number relations. Comparing small sets of numbers and early forms of addition and subtraction. And there is also a fluency standard in kindergarten you might want to know about, that students are able fluently to add and subtract within 5, I believe it is. And so, practicing that, you'd want to see practice about that, and that your curriculum is paying enough attention to that for it to develop over the course of the year.
And this
writing numerals, by the way, just simple literacy in terms of that is also important.
And this thing about explaining your work and explaining your answers, I mean, is that a red flag or is that okay? Is that something you expect to see?
I think it's important to point out that students needn't always explain their answer. I think this kind of thing can be taken too far. People can drive kids nuts, particularly the kids who are getting it, who are like, get off my back, kind of. And that good teaching recognizes those moments and those tensions.
Okay.
But standards that ask students to explain things are good because, a teacher asks you to show your work, same reason a doctor asks to look inside your ears. There might be something wrong in there, and it's their job to fix it, and there often is. So we can't believe that every moment like this is fuzzy or anti-intellectual. In fact, it is pro-academic.
So it's really, right, so part of this is actually diagnostic, right? I mean, right, this is not a matter of giving the kids credit or not. It's a matter of helping the teacher understand, have they, are they doing this by heart? Are they doing it by counting on their fingers? Are they, what?
Give an example. One of the very important areas in grades 6 and 7 is ratios and proportional relationships. But I think because of many of the deficits in K-5 arithmetic, students come out of K-5 really not with full multiplicative thinking. They're fundamentally adding machines. And so they're never really thinking multiplication. And so then you get to ratios and proportional relationships, and you want to see, is the student solving it by skip counting? Or are they really solving it by multiplying and dividing? And so those kinds of things are important for educators to do. Now, you might have a different balance of that in the daily classroom discussion than you have on a summative assessment.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, nuance and balance are important in these things.
Okay. All right, we're going to open it up to questions in the audience as well as online. Online, if you have a question, you can tweet it to #CoreControversy. We'll be looking for that, as I will here on my phone. I'm not checking my email. I'm looking at Twitter. All right. So anybody have a question in the audience, please raise your hand and we'll get to you. In the meantime, can I put you on the spot about something here?
Yeah, sure.
yeah. I mean, I've been doing that all along, Jason. Are you willing to name names? I mean, which programs out there are Common Core aligned and which ones are just selling snake oil? That's where the lawyers come out and say, no, Jason, you cannot answer that question.
I worked so hard on the publisher's criteria. My team and I and our partners have worked so hard on these rubrics. I would really like people to study and learn these rubrics because until we have a discerning community of educators, it's going to be hard for us to make real improvements.
All right, but
so that's the politic answer. Now, I'll go further since we're in this intimate kind of talk show thing. And
that's the idea. Yeah, Oprah gets people to open up there and spill their guts.
I'm not going to jump up on the couch.
You don't seem like that type, Jason.
I ask myself every day if I'm doing enough. Because I see things and I wish the quality were higher and I wish the alignment were tighter. So I think this is an ongoing question. I think it's not easy to take the content industrial complex and move it overnight. So that
was very tweetable, people. Come on.
We're going to have to start looking under the hood a little bit. Sometimes I think I'll give my 10,000 foot analysis. My 10,000 foot analysis is you tend to have mass market products that are built with very expensive content management systems, and it's pretty easy for them to sort the right topics and the right grades. The topics are all just blocks to them anyway, right? And the programs are highly modularized anyway. So in these mass market books, it'd be a little surprising if the grade topic matrix was highly off. But you would find as you read through it and tried to think about mathematics as a coherent discipline, you'd be like, issues here in quality and kind of depth. The other segment of the market is more like what you call artisanal curricula, maybe authored more by a smaller number of people, maybe, and there you might find better problems or better individual lessons, but there you're going to find they're maybe dragging their feet on picking up the pace to college and career-ready standards. They've been developed in a previous era in which not everybody was expected to get to and through a fair amount of algebra. And so those are the two market segments I see, and at the high level, that's, I guess. By the way, to have informed opinions on this, I'd have to spend 40 hours a week paging through these giant books. I hope they start to get smaller.
Yeah. It does seem like that there's this question of sort of who's going to do this work of taking your criteria and applying it to all these books. Are we asking individual teachers? Is it at the school district level, knowing that most school districts in America are tiny, right? 5,000 kids. 10,000 kids maybe. Is it the states? I mean, I look around and some of us in this room went through the Reading First experience when it was the role of the federal government, for better or for worse, to enforce alignment with scientifically based reading instruction. That took heroic efforts, and in the end there were some people that got fired because there was a view that they went too far. There were some publishers that didn't like that they were told that their stuff was snake oil, which it was. Right. So the question is, how do we, who's going to do this tough work of just clearly saying this book claims to be Common Core aligned and it's not. It's doing the same thing it's been doing for 20 years and it's lying to you.
I'm open to a lot of ideas, and we've heard some of these ideas, and they're kind of out there. One thing I would like to see is picture a district, large district, or a state is trying to evaluate some books, trying to evaluate their quality and their alignment. There are certain matters of fact, such as how focused is the book, how well does it track the coherent progression through the grades. Those are matters that, for example, academia could help with. So the TIMS methodology is not only an assessment system; it's also a methodology for coding textbooks. So you have this fairly unproblematic methodology. It's based in research. It has ties to measures of achievement. You could come up with matters of fact about these books and provide that as an input to these decisions, and then perhaps let teachers make further evaluations based on the variables they know best, like usability and how well this is going to work with my kids, and how motivating the material is for the students, and on and on. So there might be a way to have teamwork on the matters of fact and then the usability stuff. But it's, I think it's inevitably distributed. Okay.
All right. We have a question, as always, at these panels. Please ask a question. Don't give a speech, or don't give a speech with a question mark at the end. Tell us who you are, and we'll hear your question. So right here, yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rich Long. One of the observations in terms of talking about, in terms of high-level standards, I interact with, we think up to where we want them to be. Right or wrong in that case?
I think that we have been and are engaged in a process of constant learning and improvement. And I think that the Common Core is a major development in the history of American mathematics education that will continue to echo beyond 10 years, 20, 30. I think that we're talking about returning arithmetic to our classrooms, returning mathematics as an academic subject to a culture, and that doesn't happen overnight, and I do see the effects lasting and playing out over a long time. But I also don't want to downplay how much has happened already. A lot has moved already in a very large, distributed, $600 billion a year system. So it's ongoing. And I think that there are levers that we've not figured out how to pull, like teacher education programs. Mathematicians that I work with have been working for 20 years to help give teachers the mathematical education they deserve. And they've made some successes. They've created some interesting models, but it has not sparked a countrywide results. And so, can the Common Core be a way for those efforts to spread? And, for example, I was talking to a mathematician just the other day. He's been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. And he said, for the first time in my professional career, teachers are asking me to understand the math better. We've had standards that used to suppress the math for the very reasonable argument that since teachers and textbooks are not where they need to be, we'd better have standards that keep that quiet. And the result of that cautious approach has been that after 20 years, we still have teachers and textbooks that are not where we'd like them to be. And so the Common Core is shining a light on this, and it's painful right now.
Do you think, would departmentalization help in the elementary schools? We should just, we would only have to train half the teachers in how to teach math if we had the kids switch,
one of the recommendations of the National Math Panel was, subject level expert teachers. I don't know the research on this. I don't have a strong view on it.
All right, we've got a question from Twitter. First, I do want to point out one tweet that says that you look like Peyton Manning. True or
Manning.
false? Yes, I don't know. That's what
my
they say.
sister went to UT and took a class with him. I'm going to let her adjudicate that one.
I would take that. That's great. All right, Molly Bloom via Twitter says, question, I hear parents say, I want my kids' math homework to look like mine, to be understandable. Is that a fair concern? How do parents make sense of this?
I think we need to be willing to criticize clumsy efforts to attain these components of rigor that I'm talking about, conceptual understanding, procedural skill, and application. I've seen clumsy efforts at all of them, and I'm not excited to defend those things.
Yeah.
On the other hand, again, if we want students to get to and through algebra, there's no carrying the one in algebra.
Yeah.
So while we learn arithmetic and become fluent at it, and the standards are unprecedentedly clear about that, we have to make sure that, like the high-performing countries do, we are also building the intellectual edifice that will allow them to generalize arithmetic when they get to middle school.
I mean, it seems to me that, a lot of this is going to make it easier for parents, right? I mean, in some ways, this is going back to something that probably a lot of parents grew up with, which was a big focus on arithmetic in the elementary grades.
The standards, and I don't know how widely this is appreciated, but the standards were not just an attempt to raise the bar. They were designed to raise achievement.
Yeah.
In a way, this is meant to make math easier by...
Okay, don't tweet that. Just kidding. Neil? All right.
By limiting in the way that these high-performing countries do. Now, the hard news is what we're focusing on is also actually the toughest stuff.
Yeah.
Fractions, the way fractions relate to whole numbers, the way, we have algebra avoidance in this country. A lot of the algebra work kids do, it doesn't have fractions in it, right? We've created a lot of avoidance mechanisms. So, the reason we're asking to focus so much on it is, I'm afraid, as I say, it's intricate, necessary, and difficult. So, these are things standardized tests have shied away from. The psychometricians put together the test, and they like to have their spread of p-values, and so are they getting enough of the difficult prerequisites that they need? So that's where the tough medicine comes in.
Okay, in the back here. And make sure that's on. Folks at home are having a hard time hearing.
You're holding on to what? Okay. Thank you for all the hard work you've done. One of the things we appreciated greatly about the Common Core is the specificity of the standards. And it seems to me that could demystify the whole issue that people have about what they actually are. What kind of mechanisms do you see for generalizing knowledge of specific things like the fraction sequence in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, or the kindergarten sequence up to sums and differences to 20? How can we let people know those specifics so that they can stop saying this is fuzzy, and also so that they know that there's definite parameters they can look for that are easy for people to understand?
There are, again, on our website, achievethecore.org, there are some, small number right now, but they're carefully framed example tasks, showing, what is the work of fractions conceptually here, as well as, a sample lesson that we found somewhere that is, what does the fluency work around the multiplication table look like? So I think having more concrete illustrations is always important. In some countries they publish standards which are pretty minimal, but then they publish a lot of sample problems. And so in a way, the problem edifice is being built up a little later. IllustrativeMathematics.org is another site that my fellow author Bill McCallum runs out of the University of Arizona. And so you can go there and see problems and commentary about them. But and we're trying to shine a light on concrete examples. Sue Pimentel, my fellow founding partner at Student Achievement Partners, and I worked on parent guides for the PTA a couple years ago now. Those you can find on achievethecore.org. You can probably also find them on the PTA website. And they're fairly concrete for parents. And they, as usual, they have some examples of what you can do at home. And the what you can do at home, it's fairly meat and potatoes stuff. And I think perhaps demystifying.
Jason, you talk about this supposed to raise achievement. Some people say, look, we've been raising achievement in math. We've had these historic increases on NAEP in math, 4th and 8th grades. I mean, it's gone on for 20 years. Kids are doing math 2 grade levels better than they used to. What's the problem?
When I look to Singapore or a country like that as one of the models and inputs for this, I'm not looking at them as a competitor. I'm not sort of sweating with my green eye shades and trying to figure out how we're going to catch up to them in test scores. I see a community of educators who's figured something out about the structure of school mathematics, and I want that for us. So I have a kind of a different take on the problem. And maybe I'm more of a technician, right, as someone who's looking at the structure of school mathematics and framing it in a way so as to raise achievement. But also, I'll point out, past results are no guarantee of future performance, and one can fairly point out that a lot of research in education is correlational, but the correlation between similarity to the Common Core and NAEP scores is not irrelevant here.
Yeah. All right, that's fair enough. All right, we got some other questions over here. Yeah, how about in this corner? You can tell us who you are and your question.
I'm Mr. Lloyd from Baltimore. Concerning language arts,
We're going to get to English language arts in the next session. So
concerning mathematics.
perfect. Aha.
Okay. How do we remedy this perennial problems where we have high school students with math ability, 2nd grade, and they're just not competent to be high school students? Are we promoting kids year after year not even do basic and does?
Yeah. All right. So
Multiplication, division.
yeah. All right. So the question is, should we be? Is social promotion a big problem? We're promoting kids who are not ready for the next level.
I don't have particular views on social promotion policies. I haven't studied it as policy. What I will say is that I think that focusing on fewer things, the most important things, particularly arithmetic and K-5, is salutary for remediation problems, right? So when you think about having to back someone up, that what you're doing doesn't grow exponentially as you go backwards, but rather there is a narrow core that extends backwards. And I'm not talking about the full set of grade level standards. I'm talking about the very narrow core of the major work of each grade, so that the job of remediation has, as it were, a blueprint that is more doable. Now, also, I think it's part of the amazing craft of teachers to sometimes find ways to manage unfinished learning in the context of grade level work, so that there's always some part of the school day where a student is experiencing grade level work on their terms. That is to say, they're not relegated or imprisoned by the seeming virtue of individualization.
And just today, one of the world's leading education experts, Tom Friedman, that's a joke, okay? Yes, of the New York Times, had an op-ed. He is traveling the world with Wendy Kopp, and he's in Shanghai, and he's looking for the secret. And of course, says there's no secret, but what he sees here is that teachers get to spend a lot of time together, planning, talking about their lessons. They're not in front of kids as much as our teachers are. You hear about these lesson study kinds of approaches in many of these Asian countries, so the teachers can really, focus on the craft of smart lessons aligned to these standards. I mean, is that something we need to really be pushing for in this country?
I am intrigued by Japanese lesson study models. I think they, as a mathematician, as a former teacher myself, when I think about investing in my own college level lessons over semesters and months, that's what worked, what didn't work, all the things, as well as, is this really getting at the mathematics we want? Did this problem give the right access points? Did it lead to the right place? Should this lesson be 2 or 3 days instead of 1? That's another thing you find in high-performing countries. The average lesson length is longer. We have very bite-sized stuff. The typical lesson is roughly a day, as opposed to roughly several days or a week. So lesson craft, Japanese lesson study, all those things do strike me as very interesting as a mathematician and as an educator. What I'll point out is that they are a nice and ultimately failed idea unless we focus on the core things that are worthy of that investment. If you're going and doing Japanese lesson study on a lesson about data tables in first grade, that's a waste of everybody's time. What they need to be doing is that stuff on, again, counting cardinality, the early place value system, the getting into the algorithms, all those things. We need, I think, all the good stuff that's out there needs to be focused, like as if through a magnifying glass, to set this core of mathematics on fire. So all those things strike me as valuable.
Okay, great. Neil, yes, let's go ahead and let Neil have his say.
All right.
All right. It's got to be about math, Neil.
Sitting here this whole time?
No, that's right. Can't be about the federal rule. It's got to be about math.
Well, it may imply a federal rule.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I hope everyone can hear me. It is about math, although it's also about the governance piece. And you talk about not getting partial credit. And as I've read the math standard, I'm not a mathematician. I don't see that in the standards. But as I went through, for instance, a bunch of the sample questions on the Smarter Balanced website, and there are questions among those samples that will give you partial credit. So I guess the question is, especially if the test ultimately does a lot of driving what people are teaching, who is looking at these tests so they don't diverge from what you wanted the standards to do, and they do things like give partial credit.
I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I'm against partial credit. I think teachers give partial credit a lot, and if partial credit is good psychometrics and it helps get more precise measurements, I'm not against partial credit. What I was trying to say is I don't think kids should always be made to explain their work or show their work, particularly as they get it more and more. So I'm going to get to your larger question in a moment, but I can't resist saying one thing. I did have a college graduate student professor, who's a mathematical physicist, who would give us problems that took about 25 hours to solve, and they were worth 1 point or 0 points. And we said, Professor Wickman, why don't you give partial credit? He said, partial credit destroyed the challenger. They had everything right but the O-rings. And that was an interesting lesson, perhaps on the extreme end of things. So I don't mean to be that extreme, but your larger question about the assessment consortia and really assessment development everywhere is an acute one, even perhaps more urgent than looking over across the whole content landscape of textbooks, is making sure that those blueprints and specifications are right. And I have worked with both the consortia, for example, again, first and foremost, that they get the most points on the things that matter most, so that it's at least 75% on the major work of the grade. And you can look at the blueprint level and see that they're at least shining the light on the right content. And again, these things can unravel at any time. You have someone pop up who likes topic X, and then it gets, it's very messy to keep these ships kind of rowing in the same direction and in the right direction. So that has been, a big focus of my personal time over the last year or two. And I don't love everything I see. But again, we have the publishers we have the assessment developers we have, and I do think that most people see opportunity in standards that are trying to measure, progress to algebra in college and career readiness. So, I can't give a blanket endorsement of every sample item I've seen. I've helped write a couple. I think those tend to be better. So it is what it is. And one thing, I had a long conversation with the Smarter Balance folks about partial credit, particularly on algorithms. And I asked them to do a simulation, and I said, I want to know if a kid can be proficient if they never get the right answer. Because that, to me, forget what it says in the standards, that's against mathematics. Right? Mathematics as a discipline has certain virtues and values. And if you can kind of, because of partial credit, like juke your way to a passing score without ever getting a right answer, I think that's a concern. So these things are worth paying attention to. And it's going to be hard to tell until we see.
I love that. You can't BS your way through math. Huh?
It's the one field of endeavor in which, if a question isn't unambiguously true or false, it's not a question.
Love it. Okay, we're going to finish with one last question. It does not have to be unambiguously true or false. Tell us who you are and have your question.
I'm Garrett Fryer with the American Youth Policy Forum, and this is for the Common Core kind of overall, not just math specific. But was there ever discussion when you all were designing it to implement it on a kindergarten level and letting it grow with the students as they aged on throughout each grade, as opposed to kind of implementing it with the entire school system nationwide?
This is something that states, thank you for the question, this is something that states have each approached differently. Some states have done something more like that. Some states have done something less like that. I seem to remember at one point I saw a Massachusetts plan where the grade level wasn't the key parameter, but they had a Venn diagram, what we do now the Common Core doesn't do, what the Common Core does that we don't, and then what sort of overlap where we want to do it better. And they decided to take those three. They say, in year one, we're going to focus on the overlap and do it better. And then year two, we're going to drop things that the Common Core does. In year three, we're going to add things. So I got the details of that wrong. But my only point is that different states all approached it differently, and we may find out, that some of those states were much wiser than others in this way. Singapore has, a long-standing, high-functioning system in which they not only revise their syllabus every so often, but they do it actually on the basis of how kids do. So think about that, right? A performance-based loop, feedback loop, which is something, we're taking halting steps toward, but can only imagine. And so roughly every 6 years or so, they'll put out tweaks to the thing. And I noticed this year they've rolled out a new thing in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. They've also said, we're not going to mess around anymore with the topic grade matrix because we feel we've got that fairly well for our folks, and we're now going to work on, the nature of classroom discourse and the way teaching is taught. So, I don't think we're where they are either, in our topic grade matrix or in the way the subject is taught. But that's an example of a fully functioning system based on student achievement, which would be a great place for us to get to.
And it's a great point, though, that, for example, at the middle school level, implementation now is going to look different than it is, say, 5 years from now, when one hopes teachers are starting to get students who have been brought up on the Common Core.
And I talked to a nonprofit publisher whose initial Common Core offering, he said, this isn't where we're going to be. This is meant to take kids where they are today. It has a sort of a tail that brings them into the thing. They've tried to design something for this transitional period, and then, they will gladly sweep it away, and they can do that. They have a faster cycle than larger publishers, and they're a nonprofit.
All right, great. Please join me in thanking Jason for his time and great comments.
Thank you.
We're going to take a very short 2-minute break to do a switcheroo. Next up is going to be Amber Northern. You might know her as Amber Winkler until she tied the knot. Woohoo! And talking with Tim Shanahan about English. In the audience, take a quick cookie break. If you're at home, grab a cookie too. Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you guys so much for sticking around for the second panel. We're going to talk English Language Arts Common Core in this session. I am Amber Northern, formerly Amber Winkler, as you just heard. Got married about a month ago, so that's always exciting. Thank you very much. I am the Vice President for Research here. I am normally behind the scenes working on our research pipeline, but today somehow I managed to get in front of this camera. I think for a couple reasons. One, I'm a former English Language Arts teacher at the high school level in another life. So I'm particularly interested in this topic. So just, here I am. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of my teaching background as I talk with our expert here, who is Tim Shanahan. Tim is a professor emeritus at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's also former director of reading for the Chicago Public Schools. He's also served on the National Reading Panel, which I think most of us are familiar with, which was a panel that evaluated the research on reading and teaching methods that largely informed the Reading First initiative. And he's also past president of the International Reading Association. So welcome, Tim. Also, he blogs, Shanahan on Literacy, right?
Yes.
I actually took a look at your blog this morning, and you were answering some questions from teachers, giving them some input and advice. So it's a great resource for sort of the nuts and bolts of implementation around the Common Core, so plug for that blog. So we have a report out. Mike mentioned it a minute ago. This is the lovely cover of the report. So make sure you download it. It's called Common Core in the Schools, a first look at reading assignments. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the report. Tim was the primary author of the report. And just tell you kind of what the report was set out to do. Then I'm going to ask Tim some questions, basic questions about the report findings. Then we're going to go into some of the controversies around the ELA Common Core standards, similar to what Mike and Jason did in the previous panel. I'm going to save some time for questions. And I'm also going to ask just a couple sort of nitty-gritty questions, if you're familiar with ELA teaching, that I think will be relevant for the conversation. So that's how this will work. So we've surveyed about 1,100 English language arts reading teachers in elementary, middle, and high school in February of March of last year. So it's been, a little over a year now. And this is obviously the time when they were just getting underway with the Common Core, so we considered a baseline survey. And we just were interested in dealing with some of the big questions around Common Core ELA implementation. So primarily, what were they assigning? And were these texts of sufficient complexity, which is something that the ELA Common Core standards talk a lot about? What was the mix of their assignments in terms of how much informational text, literary and non-literary fiction? So kind of what types of things were they assigning by genre? And the role of the text in the classroom. So how much was it driving instruction or not? And then we ask them a little bit about their familiarity with the Common Core towards the end. So again, that was sort of, broad brush strokes of the survey. So I guess what I'd like to start off with, Tim, is one of the big focuses of the Common Core is having students read appropriately complex text. We've been hearing that, appropriately complex text, over and over and over again. First, what does that mean?
Well, it's actually not defined very explicitly in Common Core. I think that's one of the reasons why there's confusion over it. It is defined. It's defined in a number of ways that they explain how it might be measured, and they explain. But when it comes to just in a nutshell, what is this? And I think part of the problem is it means multiple things. And so, for example, I think a lot of teachers right now are grabbing onto the notion that it's referring to either a sort of content sophistication or a thematic sophistication. And so, a book like To Kill a Mockingbird really presents pretty adult content to, if you're a 9th or a 10th grader, it's pretty exciting, challenging, high-level stuff. And Common Core is certainly talking about that, but it's going farther than that, because there's also linguistic complexity, the language that the author uses. And so if you take, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird, the ideas are sophisticated and complex, but the language is pretty simple. Harper Lee's language is just gorgeously simple in terms of, not very complicated sentences, not very out of the ordinary vocabulary. Whereas you can take some other wonderful texts that are also appropriate at a thematic or at a content level of sophistication, something like Henry James' Turn of the Screw, and you go, oh, wait a minute, kids are going to have trouble reading that because, he doesn't pick all simple words, and some of his sentences go on and on and on. And Common Core is really saying, look, it's not enough to pick things that are topically appropriate for the age level. You also have to pick language that's going to be appropriate and that's going to give kids a chance to really stretch themselves and start to really increase the complexity of their own language.
Mm-hmm. So let me follow up on that because that's an important shift, right?
Oh, it's huge.
Because as a former ELA teacher, okay, one of the things that you're taught to do, at least back in the day when I was trained, was that you should try to hit a student's sweet spot in terms of where they're reading. So if you assign them something too challenging, you're going to hit their frustration level, and that's not good because you don't want kids to be frustrated. And so at the same time, you should really try to give them something they're capable of reading right now, with the idea that that's going to enhance their love of learning and love of reading. And it sounds great because we all want kids to be lifelong learners and lifelong readers. But I think what I hear you saying is Common Core says, you know what, that's all well and good, but if we don't challenge students, we're not going to be preparing them. So is there, I guess if you could talk a little bit, is there some medium ground? Does this mean we no longer assign kids books they might actually enjoy reading?
It doesn't mean that, but let's go through a couple of things. First of all, you ask how big a change this is and so on. If you go through any of the previous state standards, whether the most current ones in any of the states, or frankly, any of the ones that they've revised in the last 20 years, what you'll see is none of them talk about text complexity. They all focus very heavily on the reading skills that they want kids to have, and so they'll talk about locating information in text. They'll talk about drawing inferences or conclusions. They'll talk about being able to compare information, but they're silent about, and how hard does the text need to be? One of the things that research has really shown us is how hard the text is really very, very important in terms of what kids are going to learn from that. And so the text difficulty actually probably has more to do with what the kids are going to learn than the type of question that the teacher asks. And so this is putting the text in there and essentially saying, yeah, you have to do these cognitive exercises, you have to do these skills, but you have to do them with text that's this hard, and actually specifying those difficulty levels is a dramatic change. As a teacher, I was told the same thing that you were told, that students had to be at their instructional level if they were going to learn, and so I spent, well, in retrospect, what seems like inordinate amounts of time testing kids and figuring out what their levels were and trying to get them into the right book and grouping kids in different ways. And as a professor of reading, teaching my students to do that in their classrooms. When you actually look at the research that's going on in this area, what you're finding out is that in fact, there isn't this sort of magic sweet spot that if you're just matched up to the text in the right way, you get this wonderful learning. In fact, if anything, the research is somewhat confused and suggests that there are all kinds of different levels that you could learn from the text, that it really depends what the teacher's doing around that and how supported you are and so on. And so We've expended a huge amount of energy trying to get kids to the just right level so that they're going to get this automatic learning and everyone's going to be so great. And then you see these studies where they actually put kids in texts that in the past we would have said were frustration level. They were maybe even a year or two too hard for the kids. And you're seeing that's the group that makes the maximum learning, at least in some of the cases. And that really kind of turns your head around. Gee, that's going to be really different. But the final part of your question is, so does that mean we just constantly throw kids in text that's way over their heads and really frustrating and they're going to really struggle with and they can only get through with the teacher? In fact, Common Core sets the goals, it doesn't set the curriculum. Those kinds of day-to-day decisions are really left to the teacher. And I would really argue for, though not with a huge amount of research, I'd really argue that we want kids across their school day to read a range of texts. Some texts that really do kick their fannies, that are really tough and that they really had to read and reread to make sense of it. And other texts that, frankly, were a breeze, that, at least relatively, that they could really handle easily. So it's not this group will handle the easy one and this one will have the hard one. They all ought to be, getting a range of text difficulties. But when it gets to these ones that really are in these ranges that Common Core has set, the teachers are going to have to learn to vary the amount of support they give. So instead of having different groups reading different things, might be that the multiple groups read maybe the same text or text of equivalent difficulty, and what varies is how much support and assistance and explanation and rereading the teacher adds or requires of the group, which is a real different scheme. It's going to take some real time and work for teachers to get that kind of a system in place.
So when students came into my classroom, I had no idea what reading level they were at. I mean, I had no clue. So, I guess I'm wondering, does this emphasis on making sure we're challenging kids above and beyond what they're currently able to read, does it mean that teachers need to know a lot more about Lexile measures, for instance? Does it mean that they need to be tested more when they arrive to teachers' classrooms so teachers aren't just working in the dark? What are the implications for finding this information out so we know how to act on it?
Yeah, high school teachers typically were the ones who are the least likely to have this. Think what your caseload is. You have, so many classes and so many kids in each class. So the chances of you sitting down and testing each student, in elementary class, if you have 25, and when I was a teacher, we had in the low 30s. I'd literally sit down with every kid and test them and find out what their levels were. And there are various schemes that are out there to help folks with that. I think what Common Core is really saying is identifying those kids' reading levels and trying to make sure that they're matched to the text is a lot less important than paying attention to how kids are interacting with text and providing them with the support through that. So I think the high school teacher who starts to notice as they're reading this particular text that some of the kids are really struggling to understand some of it, well, what do you do about that? What kinds of things? And what we've tended to do is our routines for this tend to be pretty constrained. There's the notion of, for those kids who are struggling, that must be too hard a book for them, move them to something easier. Common Core is really discouraging that. Another real popular one these days is teachers often will say, gee, since this book is hard for some of the kids in this class, I'll read it to them. Or I'll have some of the better readers in the class read it to everybody, which certainly gets the information out, and that's a good thing. But yeah, I can see by the reactions on some of your faces, getting the information out is only part of the job, right? You have to make sure the kids can actually read it too, and so that cheats the kids of that possibility. There are lots of content classes, and these days even English language arts classes, where we're seeing teachers deciding, since the kids are going to struggle with the text, the teacher could explain the content better, and therefore the text becomes an option. PowerPoint is very popular in a lot of our middle schools and high schools. I can present this science chapter, I think I can explain the content more clearly, and the kids can read this chapter if they'd like to. And I got to tell you, you ask a lot of 14-year-olds, they don't like to, and they probably won't do it. And so that's not buying it. And then there's the old standby of don't even notice if the text is too hard. Just assign it and call on the kids who raise their hand. And those things aren't really working so well for us, guys. None of those are paying off. And so the notion of, what if you keep the kids in that challenging text? And instead of, when they struggle, just telling them what it says or having somebody read it to them, what if you take them back and get them to reread it? What if you give them some support? What if you help them break down some of the sentences? What if you help them make some of the cohesive links? What if you do some of what they talked about earlier, helping them with some of the vocabulary, which does happen a bit now? I think you're going to find a lot higher percentage of kids who come out of that lesson at the end of it, both having read it and understood it, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the starting point of the lessons. And I think that's where we've maybe overdone what we've been trying to do.
So I'm going to work in a survey finding here. Why don't you tell us what we found out in the survey about whether teachers are assigning grade appropriate text or assigning based on a student's current reading level?
Yeah, and we did ask that, and what we found was that currently it's about 2/3 of the elementary teachers say that they place kids in text based on reading level. They ignore the grade level. And past studies would suggest to us, we didn't ask this in the survey, but past studies would suggest to us when teachers are varying text levels on the basis of reading, they tend to mean that they're varying down, not up. And so, you know, if you're a fourth grade teacher and you're saying you're varying text because a kid's difficulty, you know, with reading, you're putting them at second grade text or third grade text or something lower than the grade level. So 2/3 of those teachers, it's a little bit more than 1/3 of the middle school teachers are doing it. And I've got to say, I was surprised. Even 1/4 of the high school teachers said that that's the primary decision maker in their classroom when it comes to deciding which text to use. It's the kids' reading level. We even pushed it a little farther and we're asking about, do you ever like teach a novel or a book-length work to students, and a very large percentage of teachers did. And we wanted to know how they handled that. And typically what they do in a case like that, because now you're kind of stuck, you can't just match that to individual kids, they try to figure out sort of what's the average reading level in the class. And that's obviously just eyeballing it, it's not testing. And they sort of shoot for that or a little bit under that to make sure that a fairly high percentage of kids are going to get this text fairly easily. And again, you know, I'm not sure we should be quite as concerned about how well kids can read the text when we first present it. Like the definition of instructional level in terms of technical terms would be the student can read this with 75 to say 90% comprehension. That's without the teacher. That's without any kind of assistance. And so that notion of those are the books that we're going to work with means that you're giving kids very opportunity to learn anything new that they can't do. And so when you start to work with a book that maybe the kids are struggling with, but by the time they're done struggling with that chapter, they can actually read it, I think that's a real different kind of a teaching situation.
So let's move on to another shift. Again, one that was unfamiliar to me in my teaching days, which is that the Common Core expects teachers to focus on text selection rather than put as much emphasis on skills, right? So, I mean, and let me try to break this down a little bit. So, you know, a skill would be find the main idea, for instance, right? So you can find the main idea in, you know, Oedipus Rex, or you can find the main idea in Of Mice and Men, right? And so I guess my question is, why does the Common Core care about what text that you use to teach a skill? Why can't I just hang the skill on any text? Why do I have to bring the text to the forefront and then think about the skills that I teach in relation to that text?
Yeah, again, it really is a big shift with Common Core that is making the text so central. ACT published a really interesting study a few years back where they went through and they broke out their tests with literally, I think it was 500,000, data from 500,000 kids around the country, looking to see if they could figure out which items, which particular skills these students had and didn't have that might allow high schools to have some direction as to what to teach and so on. And what they kept finding was there was no distinction among the question types that they had, and they kept coming up with new question types and trying to categorize this stuff, and maybe the main idea questions and the vocab didn't make any difference. When they decided to actually, what if you break it down by text difficulty? And they didn't do Lexels or anything. They literally came up with a rubric and had people just sort the passages into 3 categories. Really complex, sort of average complex, and more straightforward, simple. And what they found is that you could explain most of the variation in students' performance on the basis of how hard the texts were. That it wasn't the question types that were, in fact, if you had a hard text, no matter how simple the questions seemed, people struggled with them. And if you had a really easy text, no matter how complicated you thought the questions were, people could answer them. And frankly, the way they laid out those data were really interesting. But the fact is, this is something we've known since the 1940s. Things like question types don't distinguish performance on a reading comprehension test. And so what you see going on these days is not only do we have curricula that are largely built around skills like you're talking about, but we also have a lot of curriculum that's based on the tests. And the way people break it down isn't by passages when it comes to reading. They treat it like a math test. Gee, what kind of a problem did they pose? Is this addition or is it subtraction? Gee, is this a main idea question? Is it a detail question? And teachers actually spend a lot of time trying to teach those and give kids practice with those, when the thing that really drives the kids' reading ability is how hard was the language and how complex were the ideas in the text that you've struggled with. Could you handle that complicated text? And so you'll find kids who, they can answer main idea questions in a simple text, but they can answer it in the harder text. But the instruction is all driven by, we just need to practice main ideas. What you'd be better off having those kids practice is reading a harder text and asking a whole range of questions.
Right. Well, that's key, right?
That's really
it's
key.
It's easier to find, is that a dull, that's like a dull thing, moment, right? It's easier to find the main idea in an easier text. And it's harder to find it in a more complex text. Yeah, right, it makes sense.
You have to learn to negotiate those texts, though. I mean, how do you make sense of that harder text? I mean, everybody in this audience, I'm sure, has had an opportunity at some point in their life where there was a text that was just they struggled with. And what did you do to figure it out? Well, one of the real common things is I read it twice. I went back and tried it again. I didn't get it the first time. The amount of rereading in school is really very, very small. We try to give kids texts that they won't have to reread, so they don't have to do that work. And so instead of figuring out how do I negotiate this hard text, we give them a lot of skills practice. It's not that that's such bad practice, but it would make so much more sense if that skills practice were actually following the text rather than the other way around.
Right. What's the tail wagging the dog kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's touch on another shift, which is that the Common Core encourages teachers to spend more time on informational text. And again, we've heard this a lot. And we want to know why. And I guess even before that, can you just tell us what's informational text, what's literary nonfiction, because we hear that a lot too, and I guess fiction too, although most of us will probably know that.
Sure. Yeah. Let's start with what they are, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement in the field. I mean, that's one of our problems. If you look at some definitions of it, it's, for example, a real popular definition these days in reading education is that informational text refers to text about the natural and social world. It'd be the kind of text you might see in science or in history or so on. But it tends to be text about general categories of things rather than about individual instances. And so, for example, I'll tell teachers, if it's about dolphins, it's probably an informational text. If it's about Flipper, it's probably more of a story. It's probably more narrative. And the whole idea of that definition is really to try to make sure that we sort of get away from just stories and narrative, and to get kids reading a wider range of text, the kinds of text that you're going to see in a science class or in a history class. There are, the Common Core, again, doesn't give a specific definition, but when you actually look at what they include in it, they're not really just talking about something like an encyclopedia article. They're talking about argument, they're talking about speeches, and so it's almost any text that isn't just strictly, poetry or novels or short stories, or it's almost a negative definition. It's all those other texts, and the reason why it's important. So we can quibble around the edges about what the definition is, but I think for the most part, it's sort of like pornography. We recognize it when we see it. There are various reasons why I think Common Core made such a big deal out of it, because in fact, pretty much all the state standards made mention of the fact that kids had to read literary and informational text. So that part of it isn't very new. Where Common Core really changed the game on this one was two ways. One, at every grade level, they articulate the reading comprehension standards, both showing you what they look like with literary text and showing you what they look like with informational text. And they can look quite different. And so they did that. And then the real kicker, and the one that gets cited the most in all the controversy, is they made a suggestion for how much experience with these texts that kids should have. And what they said was elementary students, K-5, should be about half their academic reading time should be literary, and about half of it should be informational. And for kids 6th through 12th grade, we're talking more of a 70-30 split, where kids would be spending considerably more time reading informational text than reading poetry and fiction and so on. The reason why Common Core has done that, again, a couple of reasons. One is we have a little bit of information suggesting that American kids don't do as well with informational text as they do with literary text in the international comparisons. In some countries you see the other pattern, and in some countries you don't see any difference. But our kids tend to do better with stories and that kind of text than with the text that, frankly, most of us do our work around. Most of us aren't asked to read fiction or poetry in the workplace. If you look at college majors, certainly English majors read a lot of literary text. In most other majors, that isn't what an engineer reads. That isn't. So there is some importance to making sure our kids can read that kind of material well. A second thing is we have quite a bit of research showing, especially at the elementary level and the middle school level, that in fact in school our kids have been getting very little experience with informational text, that we have kids reading a lot of stories and not so much of other kinds of text. And so, gee, if your kids aren't doing so well with informational text and most of their experiences with literary text, maybe if you change that balance a bit, you'll
Our survey
improve things.
had a little bit to say about that.
Our
right?
survey
Yeah.
did have, this is the people who, more from the political fields than within education, this has been a controversy. The Glenn Becks of the world are making a very big deal out of the fact that informational text is in the Common Core. One of the things that they repeatedly say is that the Common Core is no longer going to allow students to read classical literature in school, which is obviously totally wrong. Even if you just take the percentages that are in the Common Core, but what they've done with those percentages is they're saying that 70-30 break that I said was for kids' academic reading, they're saying that's for the English class. And it's a funny thing because it's pretty explicit in the Common Core. In fact, now I even get calls from reporters who say, given that it says this explicitly, how are the critics getting this so wrong? Because it really is there saying this isn't the English class, this is all of the classes. Think about what it means to say that kids, 30% of their reading is supposed to be literary. How many English classes do you take? And in most curricula, students are taking 6 high school courses or 7 high school courses. Typically, the English class is about, 17%, 16%, something like that of the kids' school day. And 30% of the reading would be literary. And the rest of the reading would be this informational text. Well, where should that reading take place? Well, a good deal of it should take place in your social studies class, and in your math class, and in your history class. But in fact, some of it ought to take place in the English class too. Mm-hmm. Because in fact, English teachers bring special knowledge about language and rhetoric. And so the notion of having kids read what we've traditionally called literary nonfiction, things like reading essays, reading rhetorical texts, is traditionally a part of the English curriculum. That's not some odd thing. And so we asked teachers whether they were teaching informational text. Now, we didn't get into percentages or stuff because we were only talking to the English teachers, but we wanted to know how common it was. It's roughly 80% of the high school teachers were telling us that in their current English course, whichever one they're teaching right now, their teaching informational text. They're already teaching, now whether they're teaching it within their school to the extent the Common Core is asking for, whether they're teaching any of the particular exemplars that Common Core puts forward. But the fact is, despite what the critics are blowing up around this, it's very common right now for our teachers to introduce kids to informational text within the English program. So
It goes down,
it's really
I think,
important.
by grade level, as I recall. I think middle school it goes down, elementary goes down. I mean, how you'd expect in
Yeah.
terms of how they're integrating this type of text.
Yep.
Let's try, and we're going to go to audience questions in just a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about the intersection, if any, between Common Core and E.D. Hirsch. We know that a lot of folks are E.D. Hirsch fans, and other folks aren't, and we know that that's a very content-based curriculum in terms of the core knowledge curriculum, the E.D. Hirsch curriculum. So, what's your take on the intersection at all between core knowledge and Common Core? Is there a relationship? Is there not? Can they coexist?
Sure. I've actually, this is one I can answer. I've been getting emails back and forth with Don Hirsch over the last several weeks, and so I can tell you what he thinks.
Okay.
And in fact, he's very, very happy about Common Core. And he's happy about it for a lot of reasons. He's happy about it because of the centrality of text, because he believes that if you make the text central, it means the content gets to be central. It becomes important for kids to know our literary heritage, not just to use some text as practice for a particular skill. He thinks that's important. There's a big emphasis on research skills and writing about text in Common Core, which increases the chances that kids are going to be learning history and learning science and so on. So he thinks that it's really terrific. The only part of that scares me is that a lot of my friends who are really very skills oriented and think people like E.D. Hirsch are crazy, that they're trying to teach kids a bunch of trivia. They're head over heels over Common Core as well, because they really like the kinds of skills that are in there and what they're asking kids to do with the information. And so there's a certain amount of everybody is kind of projecting their own dreams onto this set of ideas. I believe that if we make the text more central to the reading curriculum and we study text, we don't just read them quickly to comprehend them and move on to another practice text. If we really do have kids doing things like writing about text and synthesizing information, I can't see how our kids could come out knowing as little geography and history and so on as they come out now. It has to take things in a direction that he would like, and I applaud that. I think that's a good thing.
One last one for me. When I was teaching, it was kind of taboo to be the sage on the stage, right? You were supposed to be the guide on the side, and you were supposed to facilitate instruction and so on and so forth. So I'm curious whether the Common Core addresses pedagogy in any way, because I feel like there's some dispute around whether or not it actually does address pedagogy and what it says, and is it is it sort of advocating more of a direct instruction approach, or is it agnostic, or what's your take on that?
I think the Common Core is largely agnostic. They explicitly tell you multiple times throughout that they're not going to specify how to teach or what to teach. And in fact, I think because of this fewer, bigger, better kind of notion of having a set of goals that isn't as extensive as we've had in the past, it actually, for the first time in a long time, separates the goals from the curriculum. So I think if you look at those very long lists of goals that the states had that were essentially specifying every skill you had to teach, they were really laying out what your scope and sequence had to be, and to a good extent, the implications for how you taught was pretty much specified. When by Common Core focusing our attention on these goals in the way that they have, it becomes a lot easier to get into arguments about, for example, are there particular reading strategies that you think would be useful to making it possible for kids to learn these? Well, you're allowed to do those. You could teach in that way, or you could. So you have a lot of latitude. On the other hand, there are some things in Common Core that really do push instruction in certain ways, just because of the nature of the content. Common Core, for example, says that we want kids to be close readers. And what they mean by being a close reader is a couple things. One of the things is that you don't just get what the text says, but you understand how the text operated as a text, how that author put their ideas forward. They very much promote the idea of reading a text deeply, so that you'd have to read it multiple times, which starts to limit or enable certain kinds of practices in the classroom. So it's explicitly silent on instruction, and yet at least some of what it's asking us to teach really does have implications that maybe narrow the choices in at least some cases. But geez, small group, large group? No, there's nothing there. You really have a lot of latitude. Well, do you have to use a textbook, or can you use other kinds of material? No, you have a lot of latitude in all those kinds of choices. But you will find some areas where maybe teachers don't have as full a choices as it sounds like they would have.
Okay, good. I've got more, but I'm going to open it up to you guys. Questions for the audience? Yes, ma'am. Right here. Singer.
One at a time.
So what's interesting to me about all the debate about the 70%, 30%, and the informational texts, what you just described, if I were an English teacher or a teacher at all, I would now be really confused. Because in high school, if you're in English class 17% of the time, where are you going to get the rest of your literature? You read all literature in English, which you just said is not a good idea. Where are you going to get the rest of your literature?
Well, I think most of the literature, maybe all the literature kids are going to get is going to be in the English class. I don't think all the informational text should come there, and Common Core doesn't think that it should. It is, if you think about it, what these standards are really doing is not just asking us to spend more time on the teaching of informational text. I think they're really pushing us to have kids reading more literature even. Maybe relatively it's more of an adjustment up with informational text. But I think if you look at, teachers in English classes teach a lot more than just reading and literature. They do teach writing, they do teach grammar. And so, their entire day isn't spent with just watching kids read and talking to kids about great books. There are other things going on there. But even with that, we're asking that for whatever the kids' reading day is, let's say kids are reading at school an hour a day, we're saying, and 20 minutes of that should be literature on balance, right? It should be, fairly substantial.
Can I just have a follow-up to that?
It's okay with me.
Oh my God. That was not.
So a lot of the debate has been around the percentage situation.
Sure.
What about just the amount of text? Because if anything, my experience as a reporter going into schools and my experience as a parent watching my own kids in schools, I would say there's very little reading getting assigned. You can go through an entire English class. I have an 8th grader, and I think they're reading like 6 books the entire year. Yeah. That seems really low to me.
Seems low to me too. The Common Core promotes both this more intensive, in-depth reading that I'm talking about, which of course kind of implies fewer texts, but then they also talk about the importance of kids reading book-length works and doing more extensive reading. It really is a balancing act for schools. If you just have kids almost skimming large numbers of books, you're probably not going to have what you want. On the other hand, if we pick 3 books and we just read them over and over all year, and boy, the kids are masters of these books, not only aren't kids going to like reading very much, but just as importantly, they're probably not going to be very good readers. We do have a balancing act, and it does talk about that, but it doesn't set specific numbers. I'm sure there are a handful of schools around the country where people are confused about how much reading of literature and informational text they should do. I can tell you on the political end, because that's really where this argument has taken place. It's been outside the schools, not in the schools. The folks who are spreading that actually do know. And I know because I've debated some of them on radio and television. I can tell you that before you go on, before the lights come up, they know that it says 70-30 and it's not the English class, it's the whole curriculum. they just forget as soon as the red light comes on the camera. And so it's really being done, at least by many of these folks, for political. They see that it's rousing folks up, and they're doing it. Isn't confusion at all. And you know, that's something I've actually written about that on my blog. It's willful ignorance. They do know the difference.
Other questions?
Oh.
Here.
I love
This one.
And someplace over there.
Getting it.
Hi. What I'm trying to get my arms around the degree to which.
I forgot to tell you guys to just identify yourself. and
Oh,
your organization.
Catherine Gourds from Edweek. Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm trying to get my arms around how much the close reading and those kind of techniques aren't happening in classrooms because teachers never learned them themselves, even as students. Because in a lot of the places I go, nobody does this, no matter if they're 5 or 55.
Right. Yeah, that wasn't a question on the survey. I certainly wish that it had been. My observations in classrooms would suggest it's very rare in elementary schools. You tend to see it sometimes in English departments, depending on the training of the individual teacher. It is not something that has been promoted in our standards or in our textbooks to any great extent. And so it certainly is going to be a shift going forward, seeing to what extent people do that. Of course, a lot of this is definition. I was just working with a group of teachers, and I was talking to a teacher who, she said, oh, you know, the last year our school has been doing close reading. We do close reading every day, and I was kind of puzzled, wanted to know, you know, what they were doing. And literally what she and her colleagues had been led to do is they went through the text that they were reading and pulled out every fact that was stated, every proposition, and they questioned kids about every single idea. So it was this kind of thorough reading rather than this more in-depth, interpretive kind of reading. They just didn't have a clue what to do. And so this is one that I certainly hope we see changes and improvements in. I wish I had that number.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Tim, Rich Long, the International Reading Association. 15% of the teachers leave every year, so roughly about half are new in every 3 years. This stuff you're talking about is really complex. I asked the other panelists before, how would he comment on that it's going to take 10 years for us to get 75% of the teachers up to have the ability to do a good job in this area? What's your reaction to that?
Well, not only are the statistics bad that you quoted, they're worse in high poverty schools. And so you're giving an average, but of course there are particular kids who are very likely to have a first or a second year teacher. The only way that you can do this kind of thing through teacher education, it's got to be two-pronged. You both have to deal with the pre-service issue, and we're not doing that so well. And you can't just do it with pre-service. We have, despite the rollover you're getting, you have the average number of years of a teacher is 14 years, 14 and a half, something like that these days. It's going to require both a substantial amount of in-service that the states are going to have to really step it up there. And yeah, we've really got to make sure that higher education does its part on this. It's often the missing piece. It's often, for all kinds of political and traditional reasons, those of us in colleges of education have not been terribly responsive to these initiatives. That has to change going forward if we're going to be successful on large percentages of kids in schools.
At the same time, I just have a little comment on that. I was curious about what does it mean to do close reading, right? Because it certainly wasn't how I was taught. And there's actually a couple really good videos. David Coleman, if you guys have seen it, does about a 15-minute video of a close reading of a letter from Birmingham jail. And he literally models for teachers, this is how you do a close reading of a letter from Birmingham jail. And I watched the whole 15 minutes. And it was very, very useful and instructive. And as a former teacher, I mean, yes, we need to go back and and retool ed schools and what they teach and so on and so forth. But if you're a practicing teacher and you watch a couple good videos, I mean, hello, it's really skills, right? You're teaching a teacher how to have better teaching skills. There were some really just very concrete tips that I thought he gave in terms of how to teach a teacher how to do close reading. He modeled the question, he modeled going back to the text, what it looked like. So anyway, I guess I would say that all's not lost if you're a current teacher and you haven't been trained this way. I think there are a lot of good tools out there to help someone, struggle along.
Teachers are hungry for a lot of this kind of thing, and a lot of times they just can't get it. It's not available in their community. Certainly on something like close reading, what I've often told teachers, I'm not talking about junior grade books because that's an instructional program, but if you don't know how to do this or you're uncertain, a lot of communities have great books discussion groups. A lot of the libraries operate these. You get together with your neighbors and read the Iliad or read Moby Dick, and the kinds of questions, the kinds of discussions, the kind of probing into text really is about as good a model as you're going to get of close reading, and it's available, as I say, in most communities for free. So that would be something. That's a cheap way a teacher can get something on her own while waiting for us to get there.
We've got one more question because we're going to stop a few minutes early to set up our next panel. So yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks. My name is Nicole Fulgham, and I lead an organization called the Expectations Project. And my question is, I think for a lot of us that are working on issues of equity in the public school system, there's a hopefulness, well, depending on who you talk to, I guess a hopefulness that the Common Core can really be such a high-level benchmark for all kids everywhere, regardless of economics, et cetera. But at the same time, we're talking about just the rigor, which I think we're all excited about, both in the reading, in the language arts component, and definitely in the math component. What would you say to a teacher who's still teaching in a school where, unfortunately, their kids, they believe they're geniuses, right? But they're still so far behind on so many basic things. How would you inspire that teacher or that district or that school leader to continue to embrace the Common Core while sort of feeling like such a potential, just massive challenge to get there?
I talk to teachers all over the country, and I tend to work a lot with the big cities, so a lot of poverty neighborhoods and so on. What I hear again and again when I take folks through what the basic thrusts are of the Common Core is teachers will come up at the end or write stuff to me, send me emails, whatever. And a very consistent kind of pattern. Wow, I didn't think I was going to like this, or I didn't think this was such a good idea, but now that I see what it is, I want this for my own kids, and so of course I want to teach it. I honestly believe that in far too many communities and far too many states, the word isn't really out. What people are hearing, school districts have distributed a copy of the standards, and that's kind of that's been the intervention. That's been their support system. Oh, no, there was a presentation early in the school year by somebody who didn't know much more about it than the teachers. States, for the very first time, came together and designed not a curriculum together, but a set of shared goals in these common areas. In areas like reading, where the reading needs of American kids probably aren't that different from Pennsylvania to Illinois to California, and therefore makes great sense. What states haven't done so well is stepped it up in terms of, since we have a common set of goals, couldn't we find a way of pooling some resources to reach out more powerfully and effectively in some of these shared areas? I understand why we didn't do it in the past, because people had different goals. But now that the goals are the same, I'd expect to see more coordination and sharing of resources and making things more powerful. I'm not seeing that yet. Maybe some of you are. I hope you are, but that's not what I'm seeing going on around the country. And so, especially in the communities that you're talking about, often they're getting things very, I was just in St. Louis yesterday and hearing about how little they've gotten, for example. And it's really is rough. And I'm sure that folks there are trying to get information out, and yet in some of these poorest neighborhoods, it just isn't happening. They're not even finding out much about it. That has to change.
I would just second Tim's point earlier about scaffolding, especially in these low-income communities. of which I taught, there's a push to not let them read the real Shakespeare, read the abridged version or read the one that paraphrases what Shakespeare said in King Lear. And teachers are all too willing to do that because it helps them get through the content and the main idea and so on and so forth. But you just see these kids, it was my own experience, you see these kids light up if they actually get the opportunity to struggle through some of the actual language. And I think that we need not deprive kids of that. If they're low income, if they're struggling, we need to do a better job, as Tim said earlier, of teaching those teachers how to scaffold to get them there. If they're here, you got to get them there. And how do you do that? How do you break it apart into baby steps and so on and so forth? So anyway, please join me in thanking Tim Shanahan today. Great panel. We are going to need about 8 minutes, so please, our web audience, don't go anywhere. Just take a break for 8 minutes. We're going to hear from our teacher panel next, which is great because we want to hear from those in the trenches who are trying to implement these standards. So thank you.
Okay, welcome back. And I'm back. Hello again. Well, I'm very excited. We have our final panel of the day, and it is the best panel by far. No offense to Tim and to Jason. But we have our panel of educators, and we're very excited about that. And we want to do a couple things in this panel. First of all, we want to respond to what we've heard today and get the on-the-ground view, both in terms of about the instructional shifts we've talked about some of the confusion that's out there, some of the controversies. And then we just want to hear some more about how things are going on the ground in real schools. Now, to be fair, we have a panel of outstanding educators, right? So we have to be careful. This is not a representative sample of teachers out there. But still, we think we do have a great sample of educators from different spots around the country, high school, middle school, and elementary school, English and math, to give us a sense of what's happening. So let me quickly introduce our panel, and then we'll get into some of these conversations. So first of all, down here on my left, Corinne Colgan, who is the Deputy Chief of Literacy and Humanities, local, right here, DC Public Schools. So welcome, Corinne. I've been got to go over there to their office a few weeks ago and get to hear about how they're implementing the literacy piece of the Common Core. It's really impressive. I mean, you would love to see more school districts doing what they're doing. We'll talk about that, really going deep and engaging with their teachers in just a fantastic way. Fatonia Shank, teacher at Liberty Park Elementary in Indiana. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
We've got Cicely Woodard from Rose Park Math and Science Middle School in Tennessee. Welcome. Tennessee in the house. Hello, Tennessee Score. Woohoo! Okay. Yes, I love Tennessee Score. They're doing a great job with this issue, which is it's been a tough issue down there. Suzanne Colbreth, teacher at Spain Park High School in Alabama. All right, the Alabama Grit campaign out there on Twitter today. I know. And finally, Lane Walker, teacher in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, Francis Howell High School in Missouri. Go Cardinals! Yes. All right. I hope you're not having to be in the plane tonight when they're playing. No, you might have to be. Okay. We're rooting for the Cardinals. Okay. So let me. I'm just going to be very open on this one first of all. So based on what you heard today, either in the talk about math or on English, okay, I want to ask you first of all. Was there anything that surprised you? I mean, any of this instructional shifts talk that was new to you? And second, do you think that the messages, the talk about these instructional shifts, do you see it getting down to the local level where you are? Or are there parts of this that you think, the educators still have not yet either come to understand or have not yet embraced? Fair question? Who can I put on the spot first? All right.
Sure.
All right, go ahead. Yes.
Well, I wouldn't say there was anything that really surprised me. DCPS has been really concentrating on the Common Core for 3 years now. And that being said, to answer the second part of your question, it doesn't mean that every single teacher is automatically fully implementing these shifts. We have invested a lot of time and energy on educating our school system, from the central office to school leaders to instructional coaches, teachers, about the instructional shifts. We've done intensive PD around it, which usually looks something like something led at the district level initially and then followed up with in the classroom support through our instructional coaches. We're lucky to have instructional coaches in the system who can provide on the ground support to small groups of teachers in an ongoing way. And so we had, for ELA, for instance, we had professional development focused specifically on the instructional shifts, different topics at different times, starting really with text complexity, as that is so central. But that doesn't mean that necessarily every teacher has fully embraced those shifts. But I can say, from my vantage point, I can definitely hear that the conversation in our district is changing. When we get groups of teachers together, we hear them talking about the complexity of the text. We hear them talking about putting together text sets. Close reading, academic vocabulary is something that has really taken hold. The citing evidence from the text, so making sure that students are really going back to the text, both orally and in writing, to cite evidence to support their ideas is something that I hear teachers talk about a lot. So that's all very encouraging. I will say one of the challenges that I think was mentioned in the earlier panels is that as new teachers are coming in, they've missed basically 2 years worth of PD that's really been an ongoing process. It's not just a one-time deal. You go deeper and deeper each time you work with the teachers. So trying to catch everyone up has been a challenge for us.
Do you think if we did the survey that Fordham did nationally, if we did that in DCPS and asked, say, elementary school teachers about this sort of assigning these sort of just right texts, the reading level tests versus grade level texts, and really challenging kids to read sometimes above their current reading ability, I mean, what would you guess? Do you think that's happening out there?
I truly believe that is happening in our school district because we were able to, we did a lot of work pulling teachers and coaches together to design a new curriculum around the Common Core, and central to that curriculum is suggested anchor texts. So not to say that we've already arrived at all the perfect texts. It's a lot of, it takes a long time to think about what would be the best text, but we've been able to provide schools with the actual text, so actual resources to use in the classroom, and have designed curriculum around these anchor texts, and these are grade level complex texts. So that doesn't mean that our teachers never provide students with just right text either. We do a combination. So we have a standardized approach to literacy through what we call our 120-minute literacy block, and during that there is time devoted specifically to grade level complex text, and then there's other time devoted to students doing independent reading or small group instruction where they're reading texts more at their independent or instructional level. So we're trying to strike that balance. I really hope those survey results would look different in DCPS. I would love for you to come and do that in DCPS.
Great. And do you think, what was I just going to ask? I had a great question. The books for this. Have you had to buy a lot of new books?
Yes. Yes, and we would love to buy more and more and more and more. And books are expensive. But yeah, we have bought a lot of books. And the other big shift there was the informational text. And we were really made a commitment to trying to hit those 50-50 balances and 70-30 balances. And so particularly at the elementary level, we bought a lot of nonfiction texts. And that was new for a lot of our teachers. And I'm seeing it as my own children are in school, and they're bringing some nonfiction reading home too. So it's exciting to see.
That's great. And this curriculum that you have developed with teachers that actually names texts, can you make that publicly available to the whole country?
I'd have to check.
Okay. We'll get back to you on that one. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. Fatani, what about for you? What did you hear?
Our state is a little bit different. The Common Core was implemented in kindergarten 2 years ago, then first grade, and then this year was supposed to be second grade. But the state has put a hold or a pause button on the Common Core. But our school district had already started implementing the Common Core. So this year, everybody's doing the Common Core with the Indiana State Standards implemented into the Common Core. So it's a little bit different. So we have a committee of teachers, about 102 of us, I guess, that work K through 12, developing our curriculum with the standards where we wanted them to be placed in math and language arts. So in our language arts blocks, there's 6 units. And in our 6 units, then we put the Common Core standards in there for us. So we did that for 2 weeks. And then we had the standards, and we did a diagnostic test for them and a summative test the teachers created. Then we came back this fall, and we revamped our maps and looked at them and made unit guides for our teachers to use. So that's how we're implementing ours. We've been working more on nonfiction because our new superintendent, one of the things she wanted to do is put more nonfiction into our classrooms, along with we've had staff development on close reading. So those are some things.
That's great. So when you've been putting this curriculum together, first of all, I mean, help us understand why, if every school district in America is doing this, right? This feels like, a lot of reprecation of effort. I mean, you couldn't just go somewhere on the web and say, all right, somebody's done this, and we'll take it, and maybe we'll tweak it around the edges.
I understand. What we had done in the past, the last 10 years, we had taken the Indiana State Standards, and we had created curriculum calendars for us. And they were in 3-week assessment dates, and we put the standards there. And they were created by teachers in our district, where we looked at the standards and felt what needed to go where, not using the textbook, but using our teachers' opinion of where they needed to be. So we didn't follow just the textbook.
But there is a textbook.
Yeah, there is a textbook. Yes, we do have a textbook, but we can skip around or whatever we need to do. But our superintendent and the people, our curriculum director, felt it would be beneficial for our teachers to make it for our school system in our district. Because I teach at a school where we are at 57%. Well, my school's 57% free and reduced. We're about 67% free and reduced. So we thought it would benefit our students best. And also our teachers, we have a web page where our teachers are able to go on and tell us what's going well, what isn't going well, and what we need to do. So we can change things throughout the year. So we don't wait till the end of the year and start all over again. We're trying to make it better as we go along.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter today about this idea of pushing kids to read
Right.
books that are maybe harder than they're comfortable with, and that's going to lead to a lot of frustration where, you know, kids are going to, you know, end up crying because they can't understand anything they're reading. I mean, how is this working out in your school district as you try to push kids towards that level?
We're doing more of the close reading with the kids, so everybody's reading the same thing, and we're rereading and rereading and rereading and asking questions as we go along. And to be quite honest, our grades are improving. Our students are achieving. The school that I'm at, 88% of our kids passed language arts, and 92 of them passed math.
Yep.
So that's a pretty high percentage. In my classroom, I only had one in each grade level, but it's because we've been adding more rigor to our curriculum.
Okay. All right,
And I
good.
think it's working for us.
All right, we'll come back to some of these things. Good. Okay, how about you, Cicely, in Tennessee?
In Tennessee. Well, one of the things that I heard Jason talk about earlier today was the conceptual understanding and application. And that's some of the things that we're really focused on in Tennessee in terms of helping students to make meaning of the math and to make it real in their everyday lives. We have, our state has done a really good job of helping teachers to become prepared. This year, our state hired about 700 core coaches to work with teachers in math and English language arts. We were trained during the spring. We had 3 weekends of training during the spring where we were able to work with teachers in certain subject areas. So for example, I was a core coach for Algebra 1, and during those weekends we worked with trainers or facilitators from the Institute for Learning at the University of Pittsburgh. And we worked together going through the standards. We talked about strategies that we could use in the classroom. We practiced those strategies. We looked at different tasks. We worked them as students. We went back to our classrooms and we had these bridge to practice homework assignments where we were able to take those strategies back to our classrooms, try them out, and bring them back during our following training weekends. After that, we were able to work together as facilitators for about a week and prepare to train teachers. And this summer, we trained 30,000 teachers in Tennessee with the Common Core standards in math and English language arts. And it's really exciting to see people come in at the beginning of the week and say, oh, I don't know about this, Cicely. I don't know if I can do this. And at the end of the week, leave empowered, saying, you know what, I can do this. I can change the way I question in the classroom. I can change the way I think about teaching, and I can do this. And so it's pretty exciting what's happening.
You know, 30,000 teachers already trained in Tennessee. I always like to remind our opponents of the Common Core, we are 3 years into this thing. We stop now. That is a lot of money we have wasted on, and a lot of time we have wasted on teachers' parts. Okay, a point to get out there. And have you found, so this is a lot of sort of peer-to-peer teaching, train the trainer sorts of things.
It is, and that is what's really, really touches the hearts, I think, of teachers, because I could walk in as a trainer and say, look, y'all, I've got a classroom coming to me in August, just like you. And I am one of you. I am not an expert. I am still learning how to do this. I'm still learning these standards just like you are. I am still trying to get better every day. But together, we're going to do this. Yeah. We're going to believe in ourselves and believe in each other, and we're going to be able to do this for our children.
Are there some statewide curricular materials for teachers, say middle school math? I mean, you're teaching these teachers, but everybody going back to their school district and might have a different textbook or have a different this or that. Or...
Right, we do have some. We have a website, tencore.org, tencore.org, where we are able to go and access different tasks. We have a task arc that we're working on right now. It's about 8 different tasks for each subject, K through Algebra 2. And so, yes, we do have some state curriculum things that we have the option to use.
Okay. That's helpful. And one last question, on because you're one of our middle school educators here. So, you know, you have a generation of kids coming to you who did not grow up with Common Core.
Right.
Right. So they may not have mastered, say, the fundamentals like Jason was talking about. So how do you think about that? I mean, how do you figure about that strategy to sort of bridge from where they are to where they need to be eventually under Common Core?
Well, one of the criticisms that I've heard is that struggling students, low students, oh, they're not going to be able to do this. I teach exceptional ed, and oh, they're not going to be able to do this. And I totally disagree with that. In my district, we do a class called Focus Seminar. And so I have a group of students who gets math basically twice a day based on how they've performed in class and past classes and on past standardized tests. We feel that they needed some extra time. And so these students, just like all the rest of my students, are participating in Common Core lessons, participating in doing really tough, high-level math tasks. They're working in groups, they're talking, they're up presenting, and it is really amazing. So I don't buy that. I believe that students can do this.
Hey, this was perfect. We went elementary, middle, now we're going to go to high school over here. Yes, we planned that. Well done, staff. All right, let's hear Suzanne. What, from your perspective, from Alabama, from the high school level?
It's interesting. I promise I wasn't copying off your paper, but the thing that I wrote down that rang so true to me of what Jason said was more conceptual understanding does not mean less rigor. Mm-hmm. And I know in my geometry classroom, when my students walk in the door, I tell them, I'm not going to give you any formulas. I'm not going to give you any postulates or theorems. We're going to discover them all together. Whether it's paper folding or computer-based or whatever we're going to do, we are going to discover those together. And then once they have that concept, then we take it and do the practice and the rigor and then take it from there to the application. Mm-hmm. And that has really helped them, because there are many times they're not going to necessarily remember that formula, but they're going to remember that process and that idea and how to apply that. In terms of statewide, in Alabama, we were in math a tinge maybe ahead of the curve with our Alabama Math, Science, and Technology Initiative, mm-hmm. because that was a K-12 initiative in math and science where many of our schools, elementary teachers and high school teachers came together and were trained in that hands-on discovery, learning the concept. And to be honest, the children in our state are handling it much better than the grown-ups. So we are working toward helping inform our grown-ups, mm-hmm. and our State Department is doing a great job with something they call the Standard of the Week. Would you like your children to be able to do this thing? Mm-hmm. And then they spell it out, they connect a standard to it. We have another initiative called Grit, mm-hmm. Graduation Ready, Impact Tomorrow, that's really out there doing op-ed pieces, looking at what children are learning and how it's affecting them. And teachers that I talk to every single day are seeing it. I was just talking to a first grade teacher, and she was telling me about peas and carrots. She doesn't begin with teaching the 7 addition facts. Mm-hmm. They talk about you have to have 7 bites of vegetables, and you've got peas and carrots. What kind of combination can you have? And she has some children that are moving around manipulatives, some that are drawing tables, and some that are, going straight to the addition facts. And then from that, they learn those facts, then they know those facts, and they know where they come from. And they always go back to peas and carrots. and they see that pattern. That is one is getting lower, the other one's getting higher, and you all come back to 7. So I think we have a lot of areas to grow in, mm-hmm. but I think our teachers are seeing some big difference. We're in our 2nd year of implementation.
Do you see as a high school teacher that you end up getting students who just don't have the arithmetic and the basic fluency and skills down where they need to be?
I think we have pockets that get it, yeah. that it came naturally to them, but there are other students that need that conceptual foundation. And so many times they know the algorithms, but don't necessarily know why. Mm-hmm. And I would have students, if you ask them what Pythagorean theorem is, they'll go, oh yeah, I got it, a squared plus, well, what kind of triangle does it work in? Or why does it work? And they don't, those are the types of things that we're working to, and as they come through. And to be honest, I've done pre-AP geometry, those kiddos that are going to be in calculus as seniors, and they'll go, Miss Colbert, can you just tell me how? I don't really need to know why. Mm-hmm. But once they do, take a breath and get that, it makes so much more difference to them in the future.
Yeah. At your school, how are you handling the high achieving students in terms of, making sure that they continue on to the AP calculus? I mean, are they impacted by Common Core much, or how does that work?
Well, we have the Common Core that, in different, maybe we have a regular geometry class and then a pre-AP geometry class, and both of those are covering the Common Core, where the pre-AP class might have more challenging problems, maybe just a little bit more in depth, more things that are going to prepare them for calculus and get them ready. The regular, or the kids that might be struggling a little bit more, may have more practical things, like building and those types of things.
But it hasn't impacted the college track at all in any
No, sir.
real way. Okay, all right, great. Okay, Lane.
We have gone headlong into the reading. It has gone through all the grades, all the content, we're into the reading, writing, defending, not so much in the math. We're just getting into it, but some very interesting transformations are taking place. 2-3 years ago in a staff meeting, you would hear things like, they don't need to know how the light switch works. They just need to flip it. I never understood that stuff. Why are you trying to make them understand this stuff? Kids were asking in our classrooms, when are we ever going to use this stuff? And we'd kind of sidestep a little bit, because the truth was, we didn't know. We didn't know when they'd ever use this stuff. And that's the beauty of the Math Common Core that's coming down into our district, is that we're starting to learn where this stuff is useful. And we're able to motivate our kids to learn it because it's useful. Our elementary teachers are starting to get some training. And we were worried that it would be overwhelming to them. But they're actually excited. They never really understood the fractions, and they were always kind of, well, I'm not very good at this, but kids, we got to learn it. Little time is possible, but they're starting to get excited about learning how to do the math they're supposed to be teaching. I gave a lecture a couple weeks ago for St. Louis educators, and I've developed an analysis of how the Common Core State Standards math uses area models with children to help them to be able to explain using area models. And what the conference attendees really liked was how when kids learned how to count, they also learned how to measure feet, count feet. When they learn to multiply, they learn that's area. Our 14-year-olds don't understand area versus perimeter. These kids are going to be learning that in lower grades. So as we start hearing, these kids are going to know that when we get them, that's going to be wonderful. So there's some excitement coming down the pipe. You asked about remediation, that kind of thing, the strugglers. I teach math to some students twice a day. And I've been employing some of these standards. I've been reading the lower levels, how do we teach fractions? And I've been teaching my students. So when it gets to 2 times 3/7, they're not saying, well, I got to put the 2 over 1 and then multiply. No, do I cross multiply? And so I've been teaching them the logic-based understanding of fractions, and they're going like, this is so much easier. They were learning fractions back in 5th grade. I have them in 9th grade. They're just starting to understand it.
We're going to have a session on fractions after this, by the way, for anybody who'd like to brush up on this. Yeah.
I teach seniors as well, and those students, I'm giving my remediation kids harder problems than I'm giving my seniors with fractions, because they're getting so confident. They're loving it. It's like they can't wait to come to their success class and work this heinous problem. So I just really like that. I have taught calculus. I'm not currently teaching calculus, but the talk in our department is things have not changed. Many of our upper level students are robots. Give me one way that works every time. Give me a formula, let me plug in the numbers. Well, what happens if the situations change? If the situation changes, they're not able to modify the formula. If the problem looks a little different, if the question's worded a little differently, it causes huge problems. So those are the reasons I'm really excited about the math.
All right, so the enthusiasm is overwhelming here. Now, this is great, but it also is a problem in that, we don't want to pretend that everything out there is just going great. I don't want to be accused, going soft here. Okay, so so here's a question. Now, let's say you're speaking to state officials or school district officials, not your own necessarily. All right, what do educators need right now that they are not getting? Go ahead.
I think we need, I love Tennessee's model, we need more professional development. We need our teachers to understand more how this is different. Because I've heard them say, oh, this isn't that much different. But it really, really is. And I love your example of the robots. And I've taught those children and had that. But so many times, we are, especially at the high school level, we look at our curriculum in isolation. And I'm given geometry and said, okay, here are the state course of study objectives for geometry. Now we need you to work with these other teachers and write a curriculum for that. But we haven't spent as much time as we need to analyzing what they're going to have when they get to us and where they're going from there. And those trajectories, I think elementary does a better job of that. But high school really needs to take more time to look at those as a whole rather than just that with blinders on just at my one topic.
And does that need to happen at the school level, at your district, at the whole state? I mean, how do we?
Yes.
I mean, it all sounds like you very much want to be engaged as teachers. You don't want someone to hand you the Common Core book, do this, and just you'll be fine. You want to be involved in designing it.
Certainly.
But not necessarily on your own either. You're not, right? You're want to be part of a team.
And also be a part of knowing what they're doing in 3rd and 4th grade and seeing that they learn multiplication as an array and that is area. And so when they come to me in geometry, they have that picture. They already know that, and I can take that and build on.
So that's mostly then the professional development you want is not somebody coming in giving a lecture. It's professional learning communities. It's time to meet and discuss.
And to meet vertically with the math teachers on both sides.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
I think
What else?
something with us is
Sorry.
Our state, you have a 90-minute reading block, you have a math block. I think they have to give some ability to be flexible across academic areas, so that just because it's math doesn't mean we can't teach it in reading or we can't teach it in science, that we have to have some flexibility. And the other thing that we have discovered with the Common Core is there aren't a lot of resources for us.
And tell me, what do you mean by resources? Textbooks?
Curriculum, just guides on different resources, like just the jargon that goes with some of the things that we're learning that is a different way of talking or the specific domain. Because I've been out of school 28 years. Or not 28, I've been teaching 28 years, sorry about that. So things have changed.
Yeah.
And letting parents know that it's okay we've started like what's called a Parents Are the Core, which we have facilitators and we talk to the parents and we explain what the Common Core is, but we also have to have the support of the parents too to be successful. So those are some things that we probably need.
Just want to point out that Fatonia needs resources, Corinne has resources, and I'm just saying it that,
I guess I will be asking her for more resources.
There's DC stuff out there that would be great to make it public. Anything else from the others in terms of, so professional development, training, time? Are people worried? There's a conversation right now, New York is probably the epicenter, saying, it's going too fast, and we've got these tests coming, and teachers are being held accountable, and we should need more time to implement this more slowly. Yes?
I think time is important. That came to mind when you asked the question. I think teachers need time to implement this without judgment. And I know that that's so hard.
Tweet that, people. Tweet that. I like that.
We need it without judgment. And what I mean is, I know Park is coming, and that's great. I'm looking forward to it. But the first 1 or 2 years, I don't need somebody saying to me, "Oh, you're an awful teacher because your kids did awful on Park." Well, guess what? We just started, so it's okay. So I think teachers do need time.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay.
And part of that time, I love the idea of the coaches and having those math coaches and reading coaches out there on the ground with the teachers helping them.
Yeah. I would say also, just to expand a little bit on your idea of time without judgment, just to not judge the entirety of the Common Core on the first set of results, et cetera, because I really do see incredible progress. And I don't want to slow down our pace, but it is going to take time, and we have to be realistic. It's going to take a long time before every student, particularly students who didn't start from kindergarten with these standards, is going to take some time for them to get to where we want them to get and where we know students can go. But it is going to take some time.
Folks here and online, please start thinking about your questions. We'll start getting those in here soon. Okay, now I want you to speak to your alma mater, the ed school that you graduated from. All right, you're speaking to the deans of those ed schools. What do they need to do to change their programs so that your new colleagues coming out of the ed schools are ready for this big shift? Anything?
I think not necessarily my alma mater, but schools that I have spoken to are not knowledgeable about the Common Core, which surprises me. So I think that there's just a lot of engagement and knowledge building that needs to be done, not just being familiar with the Common Core standards and that they exist, but really knowing the instructional shifts and helping teachers understand how they can make those instructional shifts live in their classrooms.
When you work with new teachers, you say they've missed the 2 years, but are there certain pieces of this where they particularly need help? Are you still getting elementary school teachers who haven't been taught how to teach reading according to scientifically based reading?
Yeah, it was mentioned earlier, Dr. Shanahan talked about the skills-based approach. I still see that a lot with new teachers coming in, that breaking reading down to all these discrete skills and not looking at the text as central and the complexity of the text and what students are able to do with that text as being the most significant factor for them. So I see that. There's lots of things that that were in place before that I still see now. Level of text that students are given. Let's summarize the text for you ahead of time so you can access that text. Things that are kind of counter to the instructional shifts. Yeah. We still see that to some extent, but it is still early. So
I guess I'm seeing something a little different because I had a student teacher last year, and the school that he went to, they were having the kids do the Common Core. So he was already ahead of the game when he came into my room. The math especially, he already had some of the area models and those kind of things because they had been told that they had to include the Common Core with their teaching, which I thought that was pretty neat that they were able to do that.
That's good.
So that was something different that I did not expect.
Yeah, that's nice to see. That's nice to see. Anything else over here?
One of the things that we have is our in-service centers where our teachers get a lot of their professional development are connected to our universities and our schools of education. So they work together really, really well, and that has been a big plus. We see more issues with teachers, more veteran teachers who are teaching it the way they've always taught it or teaching it the way they were taught, and that change being a little bit more challenging for them than the new ones right out of colleges of ed.
Y'all see principals engaging in this work? Are they getting involved in this as instructional leaders? Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Ours actually come to our curriculum that we did this summer. They all had to be there.
Yeah.
And they were on committees with us, which was really interesting to see them there.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Who has some good questions? Right away. We've got a strong one. Let us get the microphone to you. As before, tell us who you are, ask a question.
Thank you. Lucy Getman, National School Boards Association. Keeping in mind that Common Core is basically agnostic on pedagogy or modality. I would love to hear your thoughts about the role that technology could play in providing content and providing that professional development that teachers need. And does that have any effect on children's learning? Does that help? Does that hurt? Is it a mixed bag? Just what does technology mean for Common Core?
Great question.
I can share something. We have Chromebooks. Every student in our school district has Chromebooks. And about the technology and the resources, we've done some compare and contrast using like lions and tigers, and the kids have done split screens with it. So that is something that they're using the technology with it. And the parents have come in and thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. And they've created their own documents doing those split screens. So just using technology a little bit different. So the kids are very good about that kind of thing.
Yep. We're doing a lot of classroom flipping based on individual teachers are. And so where the concern is about how much we can accelerate students, remediate students, we have that additional tool where we can flip. They can watch the video at home. Then we could come together as a class and discuss what's going on.
So you're doing the Khan Academy, or having them watch the clips?
I do a lot on my own, but
your own?
Well,
okay.
Because Khan Academy can only deal with procedure, and he can't necessarily connect it with what came the day before.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of that.
Oh, that's great. So you make little videos of yourself teaching these things, and awesome. Yeah.
And I love the idea of using technology in the realm of professional development. I've gotten the chance to work with a lot of teachers, and even being a math and science person, working with English language arts teachers, the teaching channel, and being able to see those exemplar lessons and in literacy analysis and sending those out, and teachers being able to see that connected to the Common Core and see what it looks like in person in that video, instead of just words on a page, has been huge for a lot of our teachers.
Yeah, so Amber mentioned this earlier, that there's some great David Coleman teaching a lesson, or you talk about these other, and so you do. I mean, teachers will, as much as you want to be involved in designing stuff, that doesn't mean you won't go online and watch some of these videos or share ideas, all that kind of stuff. Well, are there some resources? You mentioned the teaching channel. Are there other resources out there that have become your go-to sources that you think are particularly helpful? Websites or?
Phil Darrow on Vimeo.
Phil Darrow on Vimeo. Okay, excellent.
I mean, it was definitely already mentioned before, but Achieve the Core is definitely our go-to site.
That's a nice commercial. There we go. Yes. And not just for their Peyton Manning looks. Yes, that helps.
Well, and also illustrative math. That is, if you're having trouble with the verbiage of what that standard means, then they have an illustration and a sample problem, and that's really been helpful.
It's called illustrated math?
Illustrative.
Illustrative math. I'm learning all kinds of things today. I'm loving it.
At the school leader and district level, the Aspen Institute also has some great resources.
Okay.
The Ayers Institute at David Lipscomb University has some great resources, and of course our timcore.org.
We've done Learn Zillion.
Learn Zillion.
Oh, yeah, Learn Zillion.
Okay.
Yeah, we just.
All right, good. This is super helpful. All right, let's get a question over here. Again, remember, folks online, tweet your questions to Core Controversy.
Hi, I'm Michael Gravens from Military Child Education Coalition. We strive to ensure quality education for military-connected kids. They normally will move 6 to 9 times in their K through 12 career. And we're based in Texas, so we do not have Common Core operating right there. But you who are actually doing the hands-on now in your schools, as you envision it being coast to coast, nationwide, I'm interested in how you see the power of Common Core for the very mobile student, whether military or not, but just as they move from school to school. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had the privilege last year of being Alabama's Teacher of the Year, and I got to know the Department of Defense Teacher of the Year, and I got a great insight into that from her. She taught Algebra 1 at an Army base in Germany. So she had students from every state, and the fact that students didn't come to her with the same preparation from all over the United States made her job so difficult. And we have lots of bases in Alabama, and one of our most articulate superintendents that spoke at our state house was from one of those districts. And those third grade math should not be exceptionally different in Alabama than in Wisconsin or Kansas or New York or Missouri. But students should be able, these are standards, and these standards are at a place where we can meet them in lots of different ways, but that standard is there for those students to meet. And when they move and when they go those different places in order to serve those children, they should be prepared from wherever they have come.
Suzanne, Alabama's already pulled out of the common assessments, right? Next spring, there's going to be bills floated to pull Alabama out of the Common Core, all right? Alabama's a pretty red state, I think we can say. That's not a controversial statement. So imagine that bill goes through. Mm-hmm. Common Core, sorry, we're going back to our old standard. What does that mean for your school?
The school that I'm currently at, I'm actually working at a junior high now, working with the teachers. And for that school, the school that I was taught geometry in, it's not going to change that much. Okay. To be honest, because those schools are high achieving schools. Those schools are ones that are, going to do the best for their kids. The thing that's sad to me is if it were repealed, it's going to be much more difficult for those rural schools and the schools that don't have as many resources. This is providing a common ground for us to be on the same page and to share resources. But I'm afraid that if it is repealed, then we'll fall back to those other things. We'll try our best to stay there, but that's going to be the places where it's going to be the toughest.
All right, good. That's helpful. Okay, other questions, either online or in the audience? We got one back here in the corner.
Hello, my name is Noah Green from the Winston Group here in DC. I had a question that I think mainly will apply to what Suzanne was talking about earlier, but I would love if others can weigh in. You mentioned that you are having difficulty communicating with the parents about the standards and that you're trying to educate them on the standards per week. Bringing this discussion back to the first talk earlier about mathematics, if a parent came to you and said, I don't understand this math problem, or this looks different, or I am not sure this is the right way for my child to learn, what is the most effective message that you found to talk to them about those problems and those issues?
The most effective I found is sit down across the table from your child and let them explain it to you. And there have been many times that I've had struggling students, and the first thing I ask the parent is, are you talking to them about their math and about what they're doing and how they're doing it? But I think that's important for them. Many parents, I had one just talking to me a few days ago, my child is learning 27 plus 52, and they're looking at 27 is almost 30 and 52 is almost 50 to add. I said, but it is. And they said, well, why don't they just put them in a row and add them like I did when I was in that grade? Well, and that worked for him, but it might not work for his daughter. And she needs to understand the idea. And I was one of those learners that didn't, I just did the algorithm. I was a robot. I did the algorithm. I did it. But if my answer could have been way, way off, and I never knew, because all I knew was the algorithm. And if I messed that up, then my problem was wrong. But teaching those students number sense, and that's something we as teachers have to help. And each year it's going to get better and better as they start seeing the children understand and being able to explain it and describe it and tell what they're doing and why they're doing it, and see that it's not anti-algorithm. We do get there, and they are going to. I promise they're going to memorize their multiplication tables. I promise, but they are going to know why 3 times 4 is 12. And it is 12. It is 12. Yes, it's 12. 3 groups of 4 or 4 groups of 3 every time. But then when they get to area and see that is the beauty of it.
I often encourage parents to come visit and to see it in action. In addition to having those kitchen table talks about what this math means and what's going on in class, I ask them, hey, come see it. I have a story recently where a parent went on a field trip with us, and we had math class at the end of the day after we returned, and she sat there through the whole lesson. And part of that lesson, her daughter got up and explained this really tough math problem to the whole class. The kids were asking her questions. She was answering them. There was this great dialogue going back and forth. And at the end, that mom was so proud. She went up and hugged her daughter and said, wow, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you understood that. It was amazing. And so often I say when parents are unsure, just, hey, come visit, come check it out.
Great idea.
Yeah.
I meet with all my families before school starts in small groups and go through a couple things with them to show them how we learned it before. Like terms, it's the same thing as common denominator as far as adding. Connect it all for them just in a few minutes. And I don't have many of those questions, but there was, I don't know if you guys saw that last month in World Magazine. They had this mother that was all enraged because her daughter had to explain why one bridge was longer than the other. And the daughter said, because something like 436, I looked at that and I saw it look bigger than 406. Why isn't that good enough? I wish she had written Dr. McCallum to ask why that wasn't good enough, because I see why it wasn't good enough. That same girl looks at 0.8 and thinks that looks a whole lot bigger than 0.25. It looks bigger. I'm sorry, I said that bad. It looks smaller. Yeah, it looks smaller. And so place value, that's what that teacher was trying to teach that student, to describe place value. Mother didn't understand that.
And that's where people start to think, oh, this is fuzzy math, this is crazy rainforest math, this is, right, this is long bridge math, whatever you want to call it. Okay, but the point is, this is still math, but you're trying to diagnose how the kids are figuring these things out, and you're anticipating other problems down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's
I actually had a parent, the daughter went home and tried to explain it to mom, and mom said she was wrong. She said she doesn't understand it. So I actually wrote the problem out and explained to mom what it was. I showed her both ways to do it. The regular way, we do it, old way as I call it, and then I showed the area model. So I had her take it home to her mom. She came back, she said, okay, now my mom understands it. She'll let me work it that way now. But mom had to understand it first because she thought the girl was just writing any old number down.
All right. Hey, people online, you're not doing your job. You need to send me some questions, okay? Core controversy. All right. But I'll keep asking my own because I got plenty. So here's another one. So the common assessments, we're now less than 18 months away. Everybody anticipates that if these really are pitched at a college-ready and career-ready level, they're going to be much tougher. And likely we're going to see some test scores plummet, particularly, frankly, in some of your states that have had a history. Not Missouri. Missouri's been better on this, but let's pick on Alabama, for example, that has had a very low bar. Yes, all right. And so, likely you're going to see your test scores drop dramatically. A lot of kids are suddenly going to be told that actually, no, you're not proficient under these new standards, or you're not on track for college and career readiness. As you think about that, how do you think it's going to unfold in your schools? How's it going to unfold for kids? How do you think as an educator you're going to talk to your students about this? We've talked a lot in policy circles about we've been lying to kids and families and we're going to tell them the truth. Sounds great. You're going to actually be the ones to be delivering this bad news. How's it going to go?
Well, I think the challenge for us is to be able to take that data and say, okay, here is the standard and here is where we are. So these are the areas that we need to work toward to get to this standard. And I don't want my students to have to go to college and take a remedial class. I want them to be prepared. And if that means an extra hour of math, if that means me coming early or staying late, then we need as educators to be willing to do that, but also to celebrate the victories, because there are going to be some areas that they are going to be proficient in. So we're going to celebrate those, look at what we're missing, and then slowly and hopefully as we begin, and when you look at those 8th grade standards, there's a lot of algebra in that 8th grade, so as they come up, they're going to be able to be more proficient each time, hopefully, because they have a better foundation.
Anybody else? Anybody a little scared, a little nervous about this? I hope, right? That would be rational. Yes.
When I talk to the parents, I call up the DESE website in the Department of Education in Missouri, where they say that 16% of my freshmen will be through with college with a 4-year degree by the time they're in their low 20s. 16%. 100% of them plan on going. 16% of them are planning to finish on schedule. When we have to explain it's a different test, of course they're not going to do the same. It's a different test. Do we really want 16% of our kids to make it? And then how many of those kids found the degree that offers the least amount of math work to get it and the fewest number of jobs when they get it?
Interesting. All right, good. Any questions here? Yes, please. Microphone. World Wide Web out there. This video will be, on our site for the rest of time. All right, make it good.
Catherine Gewertz from EdWeek. I'm wondering which of your states have policies or have any of your districts decided to attach personal student level stakes to those test results?
Stakes for kids. Not steak. Stakes. Sorry, I'm trying here. We're almost 3 hours in, people. Come on. All right, who's anybody looking at stakes for kids? What about on promotion, on grade promotion, third grade reading promotion? Is that going to be an issue anywhere?
We have iRead right now in Indiana, which is if you don't pass the iRead test, then you are retained unless you pass it during summer school. If you don't pass it during summer school, then you are in third grade. I have a student in my classroom right now who failed it in third grade. This is the second time that he's failed it. So he's in my room in fourth grade, but yet he's doing the third grade standards because he has to pass the iRead. But when school is in May, he has to take the fourth grade iStep. So that is something that we're quandering right now with him. So we're working with him. He has he goes out about 90 minutes a day to make sure.
Common Core test. Yeah.
Common Core test, we don't have it yet in Indiana.
Right.
So we're still waiting.
But I assume, what could happen, and I think we're up to maybe 11 states or so that have these third grade reading guarantees. The question is, if suddenly the test is a lot harder, are you going to have this flood of kids who aren't passing the test?
And that's with Indiana. I don't know if they'll change the law because you can't be retained more than 2 times.
Okay.
You can be retained twice, which is, if they've been retained in first grade and kindergarten, then they can't be retained again.
Yeah.
So they've got to figure out what to do, I guess.
Okay. All right, good question. Okay. I'm being told to look at the tweets. So, excellent. Let's see. Question. Okay, from Tom. Oh, this is a great question. Thomas Raines, can you address the criticisms that the Common Core are developmentally inappropriate in the lower elementary grades? We hear this a lot. Interestingly enough, including from some conservatives, which I don't quite understand because this argument is usually made from the left. They are too hard. Kids can't learn about Mesopotamia in first grade. Are you seeing that? When you look at those, pointing to you because
Yeah,
the
I know
elementary
that.
school-
I know the elementary.
Frankly, these people have no idea on this. I'm just kidding.
It's me.
So, what we're asking kids to do in terms of reading and math in kindergarten, first grade, second
I
grade.
don't see them as being harder for the kids. I think the kids need it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
When you look at place value, it makes sense because what we've done in the past, place value in first grade, place value in second grade, place value in third grade, place value in fourth grade. So we're just repeating over and over again. This is letting it scaffold itself so the kids are building on their knowledge. And I think that's an important part. Right now it's difficult for kids, and especially in fourth grade because they don't know their math facts, which is difficult for them. So there's some skills that they are missing that we need to work on. But I think in the long run it will be beneficial to the students.
Okay, all right.
I would agree. I mean, I think the kids absolutely rise to the challenge, and I haven't, with our teachers now in their third year of implementing these, that is not something that I've actually heard from our teachers who are in the classroom working with the students. They see students, yes, that was an initial concern just in general, that it was too hard, but I think that people are seeing how great it is for kids and that they are really rising.
And Corinne, you're lucky in DC. You've got a very extensive preschool program, lots and lots of kids starting at age 3. Are you doing Common Core preschool? Is there, has it changed the way you think about what those kids need to be doing in those early grades? Ages?
Not dramatically. Where there is no Common Core preschool or pre-K. Still just trying to get kids, as school ready as possible. And I feel like, the standards are so thoughtfully created and go down to kindergarten that, they pick kids up where they need to be in kindergarten.
There's no Common Core approach to potty training, as far as I know. That is still flexible. That can be done. I'm trying here. Come on, everybody.
I think with my kids, they enjoy the challenge, is what they enjoy.
Yeah.
Because if they think they can't do it, then they're going to prove you wrong that they can do it.
Yeah.
And I think the more you expect, the more you get.
Yeah. Well, where is this coming from? This charge about developmentally inappropriate. I mean, why? I mean, do you have a sense of what what is it that you think they're looking at in these early standards that's making people think that it's too much, or it's asking them to do things conceptually that their brains aren't ready to do? I mean, I just don't get it.
But sometimes when they look at the standard itself, I think the wording is overwhelming.
Okay.
So because of the wording, they think it's harder.
Yeah.
Instead of breaking down the standard and seeing exactly what it's saying. So I think that's where the problem is lying in it. Is
Okay.
they look at all these words and say, oh my gosh, I don't understand this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where part of the problem is.
Okay, great.
They may feel the emphasis on informational text or, say, on opinion writing in the very early grades may feel a little foreign to a lot of people, where we think kindergarten and first grade kids love to read stories and tell stories and write about personal stories, but the kids, they love to express their opinions.
Yes, they do.
And in kindergarten, that's perfectly appropriate. They love to do that, and we're starting to give them kind of a structure and a language around how to do that.
Fantastic. Well, let that be the last word. Please join me in thanking our great panel of educators, as well as Jason and Tim before this. There was so much great information here today. Please let your colleagues know that this video will be available instantaneously on our website. People should look at it. I hope it's a resource that can be helpful in coming months and years. Thanks again for all your work, and go Cardinals. All right, thank you.